special session of the Washington County Board of Commissioners, Ann Arbor City Council, and the Scioto Township Board of Trustees and guests to order. I will first look to Clerk Pert to call the roll for the Washington County Board of Commissioners.
Commissioner Beeman,
Here.
Commissioner Brabeck,
Here.
Commissioner Jamnick, Commissioner Jefferson,
Here.
Commissioner LeVar. I thought I saw him on earlier. Commissioner Maciejewski, Commissioner Morgan,
Here.
Commissioner Scott,
Here.
Commissioner Schenk.
Here.
Thank you.
Great. Clerk Beaudry, could you please call the roll for the Ann Arbor City Council?
Councilmember Hayner. Absent. Councilmember Bannister.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold. Absent.
No, she's here.
She's here.
I would add that Councilmember Hayner actually contacted me earlier today because he has power outage at his house.
Councilmember Lum.
Here.
Councilmember Grand.
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Here.
Mayor Taylor.
Here.
Councilmember Eaton.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Present.
Councilmember Runlawi.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And Jackie, you didn't call Kathy Griswold, but I did speak up.
Oh, I called your name and I couldn't, but I heard you.
Great, thank you. Clerk Flintoff, could you please call roll for Scioto Township Trustees?
Supervisor Knowles,
Here.
Treasurer Palmer,
Here.
Flintoff, here, Green,
Here.
Knoll,
Here.
Martin,
Here.
Reed,
Here.
all present.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome to this special meeting of the Washington County Board of Commissioners, the Ann Arbor City Council, the Ann Arbor Township Board of Trustees. We're honored to be hosting this meeting tonight with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and to have special guest Dr. Larry Lemke, Attorney Fred Dindoffer, and leadership from Ann Arbor Township and the Huron River Watershed Council joining us tonight. We have a very full evening ahead of us tonight, and I appreciate you all being with us on behalf of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. I want to emphasize right at the start here that our purpose tonight is to ensure that you, the public, and the elected officials receive answers to their questions. We also want to ensure that we hear the public comments from residents and feedback as we all work towards making a decision. I sincerely ask that each and every one of us take the time to listen to the questions being asked and to the answers here tonight. This is a very important issue and we all care very, very deeply about it. I have a few sort of housekeeping items to do here. On behalf of the Board of Commissioners, we want to thank everyone who helped make this event happen tonight. In particular, Kristen Schweithofer, our Environmental Health Director, the Washington County Health Department, Evan Pratt, Water Resources Commissioner, Abigail Elias, Dr. Lemke, Bob Davis, staff from the city and township, and last but not least, Board of Commissioners Communications and Operations Manager, Crystal Campbell. We certainly want to recognize the members of CARD, the Coalition for Action on the Remediation of Dioxane from the Huron River Watershed Council, members of the Washington County Youth Commission and Environmental Council, and other staff from those organizations and governments who contributed to the enormous effort of working on the Gelman dioxane plume issue over these many years. We also want to thank our Washington County Tech team, who's working furiously behind the scenes to ensure that this meeting runs smoothly, and members of the public who've taken time out of their busy schedules to join us this evening. Again, thank you all. A couple other housekeeping items. To our panelists, please be sure that your microphone is on mute unless you've been recognized to speak. There are a lot of Zoom squares here and I don't want to miss anyone. And please use the hand raise feature so that I or Crystal may recognize you. And to the public. If you do plan to comment during the public hearing or the public participation portion of tonight's meeting, please be sure that you've renamed yourself on your device so that staff can properly recognize you. Our staff will, if you raise your hand and use the feature at the bottom of your screen, our staff will recognize you when it is your time to speak. If you're calling in over the phone, you may raise your hand by pressing *9. Our staff will let you know when you're free to speak during the public hearing and public participation portions of our meeting. Crystal will turn your mic on, announce each commenter, and keep track of your 3-minute time limit. In order to hear from everyone, we're going to be pretty strict about the 3-minute time limit tonight. Unfortunately, we just have to do that to make sure that we can hear from everyone and get through everything in an orderly fashion. Whew. At this time, I would like to jump right into things by introducing and welcoming Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Congresswoman Dingell represents Michigan's 12th district in the U.S. House of Representatives. She's been recognized as one of the 25 hardest working members of Congress, and I think many of us see that firsthand here working with her. She is constantly available and passionate about working with us on the issues that affect our communities. She's a friend to us all and truly the best advocate we could have working for us here in Washtenaw County. She's respectfully and effectively engaged in supporting our community, and as we've navigated the many opportunities and challenges dealing with this issue, she's been working hand in hand with us along the way. So Congresswoman Dingell has graciously agreed to moderate the public hearing portion of our meeting this evening, and I want to turn the floor over to her virtually here for some brief remarks.
Well, thank you, Jason. And I got to tell you, I'm tired of seeing everybody in boxes, and I wish desperately that we were all together in the same place, but here we are. And I'm going to be brief because tonight's meeting is about hearing from the voices of those that are here participating. You know, we all have come together in the last year because everybody cares deeply about the plume. There's been a lot of tension, a lot of history over the last decades, not years, but decades. And a lot of people have used the bickering between everybody to keep progress from being made and cleanup from happening. And COVID's turned all of our worlds upside down, but you will see that your elected officials, and Jason, I've seen a number of elected sign on from the commission, et cetera, since roll was even taken. Zoom is not the perfect technology, but it's what we got available to us right now. But nobody stopped working. We did not let COVID keep people from stopping to work about issues that matter to you, which is why we're here using this new technology. A commitment was made when all the communities came together. And I know Mike Moran's on here, and we have other stakeholders who have different feelings, and we all want to listen and we all want to respect. There was a promise made by all of the communities that they would, once an agreement was made in the courts, and let me make it clear, I was not a party to the court deliberations. I won't be sarcastic right now. I was about to say something about the lawyers, but I love the lawyers. Christine's even laughing. But we said that people would come back and be very transparent about what this is and have a discussion. Tonight, we're going to make sure that there's an opportunity for everybody to be heard. So we're going to ask everybody to be concise and respectful so that we do get to everybody. And I want to thank each of the governments that's here, the entities, all of the stakeholders. Yeah, Jason said the names at the beginning. I'm not going to do them again. There are a lot of people that care deeply about this, and they're continuing to work together. The representatives of the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, the Ann Arbor City Council, Scioto Township Board of Trustees are here participating in this open meeting. I want to thank Attorney Frederick Dindoffer for his presentation on the legal aspects he's going to give you tonight. And Dr. Larry Lemke is going to talk about the science, the scientific background of the plume. So we're all on that level playing field. And then, as Jason mentioned, there are other elected officials here from the area that care deeply. And all of us here want to thank the advocates and the members of the public who are with us this evening and are always there, who do care about the community, who are engaged. It's important that everybody know that their voice matters, and it talks about the significance of this issue and how important it is that we all address it together. you know, at the end of the day, everybody here cares about the same thing. And I think it's become even more important, not less important, as we've seen what's happening in the world. Clean water is a fundamental human right, as is clean air. And we've got to make sure that we've got clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. And global climate is real. You look at the fires, you look at the hurricanes, we all care about this environment. We got to work together. We've got to, we have a responsibility to leave the land in better shape than when we inherited it, because we care about our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. So with that, I think, Jason, I'll turn it back to you so we can have our presentations and then hear from the public that's with us tonight. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Great, thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Next up, so we're gonna have two primary tasks tonight. One is starting with a Q&A. Many of the questions have been submitted in advance over the last 10 days with our attorney and Dr. Lemke. And then we're going to have a public hearing. So we will have a chance now to answer questions. Each of the individuals, the attorney and Dr. Lemke, have presentations that will include the answers to the questions that have been submitted in advance. And then after that, we'll have a public hearing where we can hear feedback from the public so far. So I will make sure I introduce them properly here. First, we'll hear from Attorney Fred Dindoffer to offer a presentation on the legal aspects of the settlement. And then Dr. Lemke will be providing a brief presentation on the scientific background of the Gelman plume. They'll both address questions that were pre-submitted via our various emails. We've compiled the questions submitted on or before September 18th and shared them with both of them, who will answer during this time. There are additional questions that have come in that I will ask if they have not already been covered at the conclusion of those presentations. Unfortunately, we will not be able to take questions live from the public during this portion, but additional questions may be submitted to dioxane@washtenaw.org, where they may be answered via our website or fact sheet at washtenaw.org/dioxane. And I know some have come my way during this meeting, and I will try and take a look at those to see if there's anything that hasn't been answered during the presentations as they occur. So first, I'll introduce Fred Dindoffer. Mr. Dindoffer assists clients with a wide variety of environmental matters, including brownfield redevelopment matters, environmental litigation, obtaining environmental permits, counseling them with respect to their responsibilities on environmental matters, and performing necessary due diligence and planning for corporate acquisitions, real estate purchases, and financing. He's been involved with this litigation on behalf of the City of Ann Arbor and all of us stakeholders, and is very familiar with the facts and implications of the settlement. And so I will defer to Mr. Dindoffer for a presentation at this time.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to now prove what Bob Davis told me is true, and that is that we should all have assigned to us a special teenager to help us get through our presentations. I'm hoping that if I do this right, that I will actually show the presentation properly. Has it come up on the screen yet?
Now it is.
There.
Okay, so now I have to learn to hit the right button. Let's see, screen sharing, here we go. I gotta, you know, when we did this before, it was much easier. I think if I hit this, no. Well, I'm gonna just start right here. Can you see the ones on the left too? I was trying to get rid of that. I wasn't sure which button to push. Are you all able to see this, the main slide that I'm looking at though? The introductory slide?
Hey,
We
Fred,
see the joint meeting of the Washington County Board of Commissioners. We see that slide.
Can you hear me?
Fred, this is Larry, and there's a little button in the lower right-hand
Yes.
side of your
Yeah.
screen next to the little toggle that has plus or minus. If you just click on that, the one to the left there that looks like an old-fashioned screen, a little lower and a little to the left, a little bit right
down
there.
here?
That should start your slideshow for you. Nope.
Ah, there we go. Look at that. Thank you, Larry. See?
Okay.
You'll be my substitute for the teenager who was claiming I needed. Anyway, I'm also going to go up here and, whoop, there we go. I'm going to get that. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you very much. And as I begin, I want to offer thanks to everyone that is here, particularly to Congresswoman Dingell, who has shown such great ongoing support for all of our efforts. Special thanks to all of the governmental interveners, all of the Board of Commissioners at Washtenaw County, who is hosting, the Ann Arbor City Council, the SIO Board of Trustees, and the Huron River Watershed Council, who has participated with us in negotiations. Everyone has worked very hard on this. We need to give special thanks to the experts that helped us through the process. Dr. Larry Lemke, who you'll hear from shortly, along with Keith Gadway and John Diodano, who helped on other technical issues that we faced during our discussions. And thank you to the residents and of Washtenaw County who have participated with us. They've offered questions and comments that are very well expressed and show insight into the kind of problems that this plume has created and the difficulties that we face in trying to resolve it. What we're going to talk about first is that there are 3 proposed documents that are being considered right now by each of the governmental interveners. There is the proposed 4th amended consent judgment, which we call the CJ. Everybody has to come up with acronyms in this world. Secondly, we have a proposed stipulated order. Now that has special terms. It would governmental parties, but it also preserves continuing future rights in making sure that things are conducted properly with this plume. And third, each of the governmental interveners has been presented a settlement agreement from Gelman, and that is being considered and would be voted on as well. These documents shouldn't be viewed in isolation. They work together, and you'll see that as we go forward. Now, before I get too deeply into this, I should talk a little bit about the negotiations. And I know that many of you have been intimately familiar with this situation throughout the process. And it's important to understand that the negotiations were conducted under a court-ordered confidentiality order. We are not allowed to discuss certain things. We can't talk about what happened during the negotiations, such as what was considered, what was proposed, what was offered, what was rejected, what was bargained for. What we are able to do, the court has lifted the order to permit us to discuss the final results, and that's those documents that we just talked about, and to talk about how those proposals compare to the current CJ, and talk about what has been accomplished with these proposals. So, now, what are in the proposed documents? And this is laying groundwork to help answer some of the questions, by the way, and comments that have been raised. First, I really strongly suggest that everybody take the chance to review the 3 proposed documents themselves. Each local government has links to the repository, and I've listed one, the Ann Arbor City link, to aid in documents that are posted up with them. One is the summary of key differences, which shows differences. It's a chart that shows the kind of differences that exist between the 3rd amended CJ and what we're looking at as this proposed 4th CJ. And also the 7 videos that were prepared by Professor Lemke, which go a long way to helping and how they've been addressed. So let's talk a little bit about these key changes, and then we'll be able to get into questions. I've listed here in bullet point form references to specific sections of the CJ. So when you see that Roman numeral 3Q, that's where the matter shows up that I'm going to talk about, and each one of them in order. But first, let's start off with the PZ, the Prohibition Zone. The boundary in this proposal is expanded to reflect the change from the 85 parts per billion standard to the 7.2 parts per billion standard for drinking water cleanup. Now, all of that prohibition zone is within the bounds of the city and where wells are prohibited. So the good news part, it's bad news that the PZ is being expanded or it's proposed to be expanded. The good news part is that there isn't any risk in that area of anyone's water being contaminated with dioxane. The next thing I point out is that Gelman is required by this proposal to prevent any migration of dioxane past the drinking water number of 7.2 to go past the PZ boundary. Gelman is required to stop that and not allow it to happen. Next, if the certain of the wells, wells and others start to show numbers that are 7.2 or increasing the western area beyond 4.6, Gelman is required to take a number of steps to plan and then take active remedial actions, if necessary, to prevent the PZ boundary from being breached or to prevent an expansion of the plume in the western area. Now, this is something, the next section is something that's been noted, by other speakers. Mr. Bicknell pointed this out in discussions and some of the things he submitted. There is a possibility that Gelman could ask that the PZ boundary be expanded. Now, is that automatic? No. It can only happen if Gelman goes to court, files a motion, and makes that request, and reasons that the PZ expansion is needed to prevent an unacceptable risk to human health. The government interveners also, under the proposed documents, would be allowed to contest any attempt to expand the PZ in court. So we'll talk about this more later, but Gelman cannot unilaterally take any step to expand the PZ or to prove that it is complying with the CJ by expanding the PZ. The only way it can be expanded is by a contest in court and a decision by the judge to make that expansion. What else in the proposed CJ? This is something that's been pointed out by others as well. Up until now, under the third amended CJ, there was a Maple Road containment area which required Gelman to assure that dioxane would not pass Maple Road in concentration part of the reason it was removed is that what about the GSI though? People have pointed this out. The groundwater, surface water interface.
Jason, I think we lost him.
Oh, good. Well, not good. I was wondering if that was just me. It does seem like we've lost Fred here.
Yes, Jason, we have lost him.
Yep.
Why don't we go to Dr. Lemke?
Let's see. Let's give it a second here. Dr. Lemke, would you be ready to go here soon? If so, we can have We can jump to you and then come back to Fred.
Did I lose you all?
Oh, Fred, are you there?
Did I lose all of you?
You
Yes.
did.
Yeah, I'm back. Did I lose you for a while?
You
Yes.
did. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
We can hear you. We
Okay.
can't see the presentation.
My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, we'll go back there. Can you see it now? Okay, my apologies. Had we gotten as far as what was in the key changes document?
You were on the GSI issue, Fred.
Okay,
And even
Okay,
before
great.
that, I had trouble hearing for a minute or two. So I don't know if we can rewind. I don't know if everyone else had problems.
Yeah, I did, and my concern was that many of these are the questions that I had asked on behalf of Ann Arbor Township. So, for example, Fred, we were unable to hear, your response to the abandonment of the Maple Road containment, which is
Sure.
of great interest to us. So I missed at least all of that.
That was the first bullet on that last screen that you.
I didn't even have a screen.
Yeah, Fred, we've lost your screen here too.
okay. Let me do this. I'm going to take my photo out and I'm just that'll leave me with just my name, and hopefully that will allow me to continue. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, let me back up and okay, so we had talked a little bit about where the documents were, and I'm not sure exactly where it cut out, but I know we were talking about the PZ boundary issues and then getting to Maple Road. Sorry?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's go back and just I'll try to be quick and somebody yell if I'm really breaking up on you, okay? So Gelman is required by the CJ to prevent any migration of water containing more than 7.2 ppb past the PZ boundary.
Fred, we can't see your presentation still, if that was.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Oh, it's not showing up? Okay, hang on.
No, we need
Let
you
me
to
go
share.
back. I'm going to go back and do the screen share again. I will do the screen share again. Okay. And let's see.
Fred, if I may, I'm wondering if you don't have enough Wi-Fi to show the presentation and the audio. And if there's a break, if I might suggest, you could share your screen and then call in and do the audio. I don't know if that might help.
Got it. Okay, is it showing for you now?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. I took my face off, took my video off, and hopefully this will hold up, okay? If it starts to go bad, I will call in and run it that way. But I think as long as you can hear me, just if something happens, give me a shout, okay? All right, so what we were talking about was first the PZ boundary. The CJ, the proposed fourth CJ would require Gelman to prevent any migration of water at greater than 7.2 ppb from going past the boundary. And then it also would require that if certain sentinel wells or compliance wells are ever hit beyond certain defined ppb values, the Gelman has to put together contingency plans to figure out what kind of active measures can be taken, what kind of remedial measures can be put in place to stop an expansion of dioxane past the boundary of the PZ, or to prevent any expansion in the western area. Now, is there a possibility that Gelman could avoid the need to use such active measures? And I know when Mr. Bicknell gave his explanation of this the other day, he said that all Gelman had to do was expand the PZ, as if that could be done by waving a magic wand. The fact of the matter is, however, that Gelman cannot do anything like that unilaterally, nor can the state. And the reason is that the CJ provides first that any expansion of the PZ has to go to court and get a ruling by the judge that is based on clear and convincing evidence that there would be compelling reasons that the PZ is needed to prevent an unacceptable risk to human health. So if Gelman wants to expand that PZ boundary in the future, it's going to have to prove that it's necessary to expand it, or else human health will be at risk, and that there aren't any steps that could be taken short of making that expansion. It's an extremely difficult standard for them to have to try to prove. Also, you should be clear in understanding this, that the order that we talk about gives the government interveners continuing rights to contest any attempt to expand the PZ, go to court and tell the judge why it should not be expanded. So everybody still, are you still hearing me, guys? Bob?
Fred, you're fading a little bit.
Okay. All right. So now what about the Maple Road containment area? Up until now, the third amended CJ had required that no concentrations of dioxane above 2,800 could go past Maple Road. That was removed from the fourth amended CJ. And the reason that it was removed is that all areas of the Plumes east of Wagner Road are already below 2,800. Now, what about the groundwater surface water interface issue? It still exists, and Gelman is required to meet it. I'll point out that our statute was amended to permit a variety of ways for a polluter to satisfy that kind of standard, the GSI standard. And that statute allows use of what was called the mixing zone to meet the 280 ppb new statutory number. We don't like this, but it's not a failure of the CJ in this respect. It's a failure of the statute. The government, the legislature passed those requirements, and we're stuck with those under this statute. What else is in the CJ? We've added clusters of monitoring wells for both delineation of the dioxane plume and to show compliance with the requirements that are imposed in it. What else? We've added the Rose Well and Park Lake Well. This will increase the volume of water that's treated by 50%, and it'll remove 3 times as much dioxane as is currently being removed from the groundwater plumes. Finally, we have a set of actions at the Gelman site itself. 3 new extraction wells and possibly more. Phyto remediation in areas where the former pond areas existed and in the marshy area. And finally, heated soil vapor extraction at the former burn pit, and a cap on that once it's done. Can I get a sound check? Are you still hearing me, Bob?
All is good.
Okay, great. So now what about the stipulated order I talked about? It dismisses the current intervention, but it provides continuing rights for the government interveners to contest any significant event under the CJ, including changes to the CJ, including modification, reduction, or termination of any Gelman's required actions. Any proposals to change the PZ are subject to challenge by the government interveners, and any attempt to terminate the CJ is subject to our rights to come back and contest all of those issues in court before they can happen. These continuing rights, however, would terminate for a particular intervener if that intervener later petitioned EPA to take over. This pill added in and forced into the situation. In addition, if a government intervener does not support the CJ, if some other governmental entity asks for EPA to take over, then we could also lose those continuing rights. The Huron River Watershed Council, by the way, does not have these continuing rights under the order. And we can talk about that at some point, but they wanted me to mention that. Okay, let's turn now to actually the responses to comments and questions that have been posed. The earlier stuff was to kind of lay the groundwork for, and it's important to understand, we have documents that are more than 100 pages long. And so there's been some misunderstanding about what is required and what is allowed to happen. And I really have to compliment the people that have tried to go through that and come up with their descriptions of it earlier. But it was important, I think, to understand that certain things are not quite what some people had thought. So let's start off. What was the first question or comment that we saw? And it was one that's something that a layperson, and that being a non-lawyer, might ask, and that is that this CJ doesn't require Gelman to admit that it's liable or at fault. And what the heck? Why would that be? And the answer is that that's a standard provision that's put into virtually every consent judgment that we ever would see. The purpose of that is that if there's ever a dispute about the CJ in the future, and if there's a breaking down of the relations, Gelman can bring evidence in and force an opponent to prove that it's actually at fault. And it can use all of its available defenses. This is normal. Next question that we saw was, what if the proposals are accepted, do the government interveners give up all future claims and rights? And the answer is no. As we pointed out in the quick discussion earlier, the order we would enter preserves continuing rights by which the government interveners may dispute up through the court any proposed changes. In addition, the 2006 Ann Arbor Settlement Agreement allows future claims by Ann Arbor for a number of things. First, newly discovered plumes. Now, this is one that's been raised by a number of people, and I think I want to make sure you all understand this. And that is that if we ever, for example, to find a plume going to Barton Pond or other areas that are outside of what has been known so far, we have a right to sue about it. It still exists. Also, any unforeseen changes in directions of a known plume that breaches the PZ, we have a right to sue about that still. And certain impacts and costs that are incurred in the down gradient areas within the PZ, Ann Arbor has some claims that it can make about those. So don't get the idea that we're powerless. We have rights to the CJ in many important ways, and also to take action if there are unknown or unanticipated future claims outside of the areas that are known now. Next, someone had asked, can Gelman unilaterally increase the size of the PZ in the future? The answer is no. As I pointed out in describing the CJ earlier, Gelman cannot unilaterally change anything in the CJ. Gelman may ask the court to expand the PZ, but the government interveners can contest that request in court. And again, to expand the PZ, Gelman must convince the court by clear and convincing evidence, essentially, that there must be an increase in the PZ to prevent an unacceptable risk to human health. These are very, very high burdens of proof and persuasion. Next, we saw a question that said, if there is an area that has dioxane in it greater than 7.2 parts per billion, is that considered a compelling reason to expand the prohibition zone boundary? And again, the answer is no. Again, the CJ requires Gelman to prevent migration of 7.2 past the PZ boundary. Also, the CJ requires Gelman to determine active response actions to prevent such a breach of the PZ. Now, Gelman again could ask the court to expand the PZ. However, it still has to prove with that clear and convincing evidence that it has to do that, or there would be an unacceptable risk to human life. So it's going to have to convince a court that only thing they can do is expand the PZ to protect human life. To me, that's a very, very difficult burden. All right, can the PZ be contracted in size? And the answer is yes. In fact, a specific section of the CJ creates a PZ boundary review that will occur every 5 years to determine whether the boundaries can be made smaller. What will happen if not all the government interveners approve the settlement and propose CJ? In other words, what happens if one or two of the governments say, no, they don't want to be part of this? And there's no clear answer to that question. We would suppose that Gelman might tell the court it does not agree with the CJ any longer and would oppose having it entered. Now the court might order mediation or facilitation to try to work out some issues and see if we can find a solution. The court might hold hearings on some of the issues that are in dispute. And the court might start the litigation process from the very beginning, leading to a trial. And, you know, finally, after consideration, the court might simply decide to enter this fourth CJ anyway. We don't know what will happen, but there are a number of possibilities. Next question that was asked is, what rights will the states and interveners have against Danaher if it fails to comply with the CJ? Now, I looked at that in a couple of ways. First of all, if Gelman violates the CJ following any negotiations, the state can petition the court for an order to compel compliance. And the government interveners have the right to petition the court if Gelman's actions are inconsistent with their continuing rights. So there are actions both the state and the government interveners can take if there are problems with Gelman. I wanted to note, however, that there's reference to Danaher, and I know that many people throughout have talked about Danaher as if it is the same thing as Gelman, but we need to be clear that it is not. Gelman is the liable party. Danaher has not been designated as a liable party. It is a corporate parent of Gelman, and so it would take some significant factual and legal research to determine if Danaher could be held liable here. If the CJ and stipulated order are entered, have the local governments given up rights to go to EPA? Well, there might be some ways in the future if there was a real continuing new discovered problem to go to EPA. I've pointed out, particularly with the Ann Arbor settlement agreement from 2006, that the city has retained a number of situations and circumstances in which it can go to court or file a petition. But as a general proposition for the things that are settled here, we've agreed not to go to court, go to EPA rather. And so there would be risks, that would occur if we did attempt to do that. Now, such a petitioner would be giving up its continuing rights under the order to contest future Gelman actions under the CJ. And there's also, if Ann Arbor did it, there's a financial penalty to Ann Arbor. So you don't take that step lightly. You recognize that there are consequences if there is an attempt made to go to EPA in the future. If the proposed CJ is not approved, are the parties still bound under the current CJ? And the answer is yes. Until the current CJ is vacated or amended, it remains enforced. And so Gelman.
Fred, you're fading out.
That may not be an unrealistic question because we don't know how long it's going to take to deal with this plume. I am convinced that it's going to be there and still being dealt with many years after I'm gone. So what happens? And the answer is the CJ specifically requires Gelman to update and maintain the financial assurance mechanism continuously until it's no longer needed. If Eagle does not issue an NPDES permit for the Park Lake well discharge into First Sister Lake, then what? And the answer is fairly simple. Gelman could argue that it is not required to address that hotspot if the permits are not issued. So that could stop the extra pumping and treating of a significant amount of contaminated water. Now, are the following comments true? And these were taken out of some submissions that have been made, and I think they're all familiar to you. One of them was in a quote that says, US EPA would halt the dioxane plume and restore the aquifer to drinking water quality. The second quote, the main elements of a Superfund site cleanup would be: 1, active remediation of the aquifer to a protective drinking water criterion, regardless of whether the plume was in a prohibition zone or not. Now, I was asked, are those comments true? And my answer is no. I'm not going to debate one-on-one against people who have said those things. What I will do is say that the best evidence of what EPA would do comes from EPA's own words. And we had a meeting that most of you attended, January 16th, 2020, and I've pointed out the specific time segment in that joint meeting video in which EPA actually addressed those questions. And what EPA said was this. I'm going to the next slide. Joan Tanaka said that it is, quote, impossible to say, and quote, what EPA would do. Continued by stating that EPA, quote, frequently uses institutional controls, like this prohibition zone, to put, quote, controls on the use of water so that no one gets hurt, end quote, sometimes as a, quote, long-term cleanup remedy. In other words, EPA might leave the prohibition zone in place, require a different remedy here. Next question I was asked was, would US EPA use its emergency removal cleanup immediate action to clean up the Gelman plumes? And the answer is no. EPA again at the same meeting stated that it could use such emergency authority only if there was an exposure to 1,4-dioxane in a person's drinking water, not groundwater, but their drinking water, at a concentration greater than 46 parts per billion. And again, I've marked the time segment in that video where you can see them say this. Currently, there are no residential wells with 1,4-dioxane in excess of the drinking water standard that we have of 7.2. So nothing in anybody's direct exposure is at 46, or the number that EPA would consider important. Not important, but that they would take action for. All right, so what are the key points that arise from all these questions and comments so far? First, the CJ would require immediate action by Gelman to better delineate the contamination and to increase cleanup, reducing risks that the PZ will be breached or exposures will occur. Second, the CJ and order provide continuing rights to the government interveners to contest any attempt by Gelman to reduce its actions, to expand the PZ, or to alter the CJ in any way. The government interveners have a right to contest every step of the way on those things. And finally, US EPA will take much longer to act, and there's no basis to claim EPA will take the site or require any different or additional actions by Gelman. And under US EPA control, the government interveners would not have direct ongoing rights to challenge changes to the Gelman requirements and actions. So Anyway, that ends my presentation. I really appreciate the fact that you've all listened, and I'd be happy, as we've said later, to entertain or try to respond to any other questions that you may have thought of in the meanwhile. Now I'm going to stop my share and turn this back to Dr. Lemke.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank
And so
you.
I will introduce Dr. Lemke here. Dr. Lemke is a professor and department chair at Central Michigan University's Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences and their Institute of Great Lakes Science. Dr. Lemke researches the fate and transport of contaminants in groundwater, air, and soil, with particular emphasis on human health and exposure risks in urban environment. Thank you for being here with us, Dr. Lemke, and I will turn this over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. I'm pressing what I hope is the right button. And you all can let me know if you can see the first slide in my presentation, please.
Yes.
We're good to go. Okay. Well, thank you and good evening, everybody. Along with several other technical experts, my role in this process has been to provide technical guidance to the negotiators and to answer technical questions from the Ann Arbor City Council, Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, and the Scioto Township Board of Trustees. I've been studying the Gelman site for 23 years now, not quite up to Roger Rail's 28 years. I don't think anyone will ever top that record, but I've mainly followed an academic path along the way. I've advised 4 master's students, 1 doctoral student, and a parcel of undergraduates who have helped me research questions related to the Gelman site. I'm also very proud of the fact that I received a $300,000 National Science Foundation grant to study this site. And my students and I have shared our results openly with multiple peer-reviewed publications. We've made more than 20 formal presentations at meetings of the Geological Society of America, the American Geophysical Union, the Michigan American Institute of Professional Geologists Environmental Risk Management Workshops, and Michigan Great Lakes Environmental Remediation and Redevelopment Conferences. I've also made regular presentations at CARD and MDEQ technical work group meetings, and had frequent conversations with CARD members and EGLE staff that have helped me shape my thinking, and I hope my ideas have helped others to shape their understanding of the fate and transport of dioxane in this aquifer system as well. Tonight, my objective is to address technical questions and concerns. I'm very glad that both Dan Bicknell and Roger Rail were able to present their points of view on Tuesday evening. I think it's really healthy to have an exchange of ideas from different viewpoints. And I'm hoping that everyone who's listening tonight will continue to keep an open mind about what you're about to hear. I don't plan to sugarcoat anything. I'm going to tell you what I really think, and if I don't have an answer to a question, I'll let you know that too. My purpose isn't to advocate for or against a specific outcome, but at the same time, I'm not going to back away from offering my informed opinions so that you can take them on board. So there are 5 main topics that I'll address, starting with cleanup in the source area, and moving on to questions about delineation and the impact of the Park Lake well on the first sister lake, issues of protecting Ann Arbor's main drinking water source at Barton Pond, and then the big picture issue of aquifer restoration. I will be getting down into the weeds on some of these issues, so please bear with me. So I'll begin with questions about the source area, and specifically what scientific investigations and data support the proposed approach, and why aren't the areas with the highest remaining concentrations being addressed. On Tuesday, Roger Rail mentioned that he had asked me to send him all of the data from the source area investigations and had not received a response from me. Roger, I remember getting your email, and I apologize for not responding to it. In my day job as a department chair, I literally get hundreds of emails every day, and we're striving to offer face-to-face instruction under COVID-19 conditions and trying to cope at the same time with impending cuts in state funding for universities, and it's frankly not easy. And I'll admit this is my first pandemic that I've had to deal with, and it's taken up pretty much all of my bandwidth. And to top it off, my wife and I have a 14-week-old lab puppy at home that also demands a lot of attention. But more to the point, however, the data that you're asking for are not mine to release. Under the confidentiality agreement, I could place myself in contempt of court if I were to send you that data, or even if I talked to you about it. That could get me in a lot of trouble, or worse yet, it could give Gelman an excuse to back out of the proposed CJ deal, and I know you wouldn't want that to happen. So, in all seriousness, I'm frustrated by the confidentiality order situation too, but I think you knew when you asked for it that there wasn't any way for me to fulfill your request. On the second question, I'll say that the highest remaining concentrations are being addressed. The proposed remedial actions were designed based on the most recent concentration measurements. I've seen some of that data along with the Eagle staff and the other technical consultants, and based on the information we've seen, the proposed approach appears to be reasonable. The notion that Gelman found something out there that they want to hide during their most recent investigation doesn't seem plausible to me. First of all, the engineers who work for the firm they hired, they all have a professional standard of ethics that wouldn't allow that. And second, I really can't see that Gelman would have anything to gain by designing some sort of a treatment system that would remove one contaminant while leaving behind others that are potentially harmful. So at this point, I'm prepared to accept that the proposed source area remediation plans are workable and move on. I think we have bigger fish to fry here. So let's talk about phyto remediation. And by now, probably everybody knows that phyto remediation means the removal of dioxane, this time by trees. However, there were questions raised about the accumulation and release of dioxane within the trees. And this is an area that it's outside of my field of expertise, so I consulted with John Diodana at ECT. And in his response back to me, he emphasized that this is an emerging technology. So we should treat this as a pilot project and learn from it. The upside is that what we learn here could also be applied at other places where groundwater could be venting to the surface, such as the Allen Creek area. But along the way, tree tissue monitoring is important and needs to be required. So let's look at that first question. Is 1,4-dioxane expected to accumulate in the trees? The answer is that it's actually not. It's expected to pass through the trees. The idea is that the dioxane moves with the groundwater to the tree roots, and there it's either transformed by bacteria in the roots into something that the tree can use, or it enters as dioxane that's dissolved in the water. And then it flows through the tree's water transport system and eventually gets transpired to the atmosphere through the trees, through the leaves. But this needs to be tested for, this is supposition, needs to be tested by periodic tree core analysis for dioxane. And the picture over on the right shows one of my colleagues from Wayne State University, who's a tree specialist, demonstrating one of these tree cores to some of his students. And it's like a little auger that goes into the tree, and this can be done for live trees or dead trees, and then the material can be sent to the lab for testing. What would happen to the trees after they die, and would they just be left to decompose and maybe release dioxane back into the environment? Well, as a dead tree dries, the 1,4-dioxane that's in it would vent to the atmosphere, if there is 1,4-dioxane in it. And then after decomposition, any remaining concentration would be expected to be very small, less than what's in the surrounding source area soils and water. And if that dioxane were re-released into the soil, then rainwater or other precipitation could carry it back to the groundwater and down to the tree roots, where it would start the cycle all over again. But again, John emphasized that this should be evaluated via tree tissue monitoring, and that any harvested trees, and some of these trees will probably be sacrificed along the way to test and learn what's going on, these should be properly landfilled or incinerated. And I'd like to talk a little bit about on the next topic, which is detecting and delineating dioxane plumes. For this one, I dug out a few of my teaching slides to help me make an important point. And I'll start by saying that searching for a plume in the subsurface is a little bit like playing a game of Battleship. If you ever played Battleship, you know that the idea is to hunt for these ships in the flotilla. The easiest one to find is the big aircraft carrier because it's the largest. And the hardest one to find is the little PT cruiser. So one of the ways you can approach this process is to use what I call an efficient search pattern, where if you go and place a guess in every other space, you are eliminating any places for that little ship to hide. The way this might apply for groundwater plumes is if you had a very large plume, like if all the ships were together, you could place your monitoring wells very far apart. That's what the little colored pegs are supposed to represent. So if we had a plume that was migrating from the top to the bottom here and it were very wide, we would get a hit. We would find it and detect it in that monitoring well in the center. On the other hand, if the plume is configured with some very narrow fingers, we might even have closely spaced monitoring wells that would allow some of the plume to slip by undetected, and that would not be good. So we have to know something about the morphology of the plume if we want to figure out how to detect it. Complicating the whole situation is we're not really playing a two-dimensional game of Battleship. This is a three-dimensional aquifer system that we're trying to detect things in. And many of the monitoring wells that we're dealing with have screens that are 10 feet in thickness or less. So it's possible that dioxane could sneak by above us or below us in any individual particular monitoring well detection point. So what does that mean for the plume system that we're dealing with here? We know that there are multiple plumes migrating in multiple directions at multiple depths. So this is truly a three-dimensional problem and issue, and it makes it very tough. Even the extensive monitoring well network that we have in place right now is insufficient to guarantee with 100% certainty that we're going to detect and find everything. Now, the proposed fourth amended CJ includes a number of additional monitoring wells in key positions. And I would say of these, the ones that are most important are the ones out in the western plume area, the West Park GSI investigation wells, and also the Sentinel wells up to the north, which I'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. But the point I'd like to make is when you look at the distribution of these new monitoring wells, they are following a strategy of selective delineation in the more sensitive areas. Are these wells going to completely delineate dioxane to 7.2 parts per billion everywhere? No, it's not even close. Are these wells placed in sensible places, however? Yes, they're placed in places along the perimeter of the plume where potential migration into sensitive areas could be detected. Are there other places where monitoring wells would be useful? Yeah, there are, and I think Dan Bicknell did a good job of pointing out one of those Tuesday evening. But the bottom line question is, are these wells an improvement over what we have now? And I think the answer to that is yes. I would like to see these wells put in place if the CJ is accepted. So what we have is basically selective delineation in sensitive areas, and that's how I would characterize the monitoring wells in this proposal. All right, let's move on to First Sister Lake, where there's been a number of really good questions raised about the impact of the proposed Park Lake well, including how much water does 200 gallons per minute actually represent? Where would all that water go? How would it cause or exacerbate any flooding in this area? What are the other potential environmental impacts? And what about the dioxane contamination associated with the lake or the wells surrounding the lakes? And I'll go through each of these in turn. But I got to say right now that although I work primarily in groundwater and I also study the distribution of contaminants in air and soil, lake and wetland systems are somewhat outside my field of expertise. Nonetheless, these questions are important and I think they deserve answers, so I'll do my best here. Before I try to answer these questions though, let's take a look at the lake using some imagery that's available on the Washtenaw County Map Viewer. This is an early aerial photograph from 1940, which is the earliest record that you can find there. And I'm going to show you a series of views. But the map viewer also has a nifty little toggle switch down at the bottom that will let you travel forward and backward in time if you'd like to check this out for yourself. So what you see in this view is First Sister Lake in the upper right and just the upper tip of Second Sister Lake down near the bottom. Here's what things look like in 1947. And if you compare these two images, and they're overlaid with each other on the map viewer, but here I put them side by side, you can see that the lake has maybe about the same size, but expanded a little bit. So there are some subtle differences. If we move forward in time to 1960 and 1979, now we can see some changes here. And in particular, there is an expansion of the wetlands that sits between First Sister Lake and Second Sister Lake that's clearly visible there. Moving ahead to 1990 and 1997, I think if you compare these two side by side, you can see that sometimes we have contraction of those wetlands too. So they get larger, they get smaller. The lake grows or shrinks a little bit as well, probably in response to changes in precipitation during wet conditions or dry periods of time. But if you look at the photo on the right very carefully, very closely, you can also see the thin little connection line that shows the path that water flows from First Sister Lake down into that intermediate marshy area. And then there's another connection that you can see down to the unnamed pond that sits in there. And then there's a third connection which connects that pond with the culvert under Wagner Road, which is on the left-hand side of the photo, and it heads on down the way. By 2010, we have color aerial photographs. And in 2015, you can see again that there are subtle changes from year to year. The most recent photo in the map viewer is 2018, and I've put a Google Earth image on the right-hand side here to compare it with as well. And you can see that again, there are subtle differences from time to time in the extent of the wetlands and the size and the shape of the lake. There's a green rim around the lake here in 2020. I suspect that much of that actually represents some algae or maybe some duckweed, I'm not sure, something floating on top of the lake. But I don't think the lake is as small as it's depicted there. What I would conclude from these photographs is that First Sister Lake and its surrounding wetlands are a dynamic and interconnected system. So on to the questions. How much is 200 gallons per minute? Well, you can do the math and convert 200 gallons per minute. It's equivalent to 12,000 gallons in an hour, or 288,000 gallons per day, or 8,640,000 gallons per month. But how much is that? I've heard it said that a garden hose can usually flow somewhere on the rate of 5 gallons per minute. So we're talking about 40 garden hoses all at the same time. Is that a lot of water? I don't know. If you want to look at this in terms of rainfall events, someone has done a calculation and come up with the fact that, that volume of water, 288,000 gallons in an entire day, if it were released and just stacked up over the lake, it would represent about 5 inches, which is equivalent to a 100-year rainfall event. I don't think that's a fair or useful comparison. The reason I don't think so is, first of all, because I think, as much as I can tell, that calculation was done with this smaller area of the lake. If we were to look at a map of the lake, and I actually was able to find one, this is a 1942 map of the lake, which is a bathymetric map. It shows how deep the lake is, and we'll come back to that for a minute. But I simply took the area, which is about 3 acres or 136,000 square feet. And if you take that same volume of water and put it over that area, you get 3.4 inches, which is actually equivalent to about a 10-year rainfall event. But even that is not a really useful or meaningful comparison, because in any of these rainfall events, rain is going to fall not just on the lake surface, but in the entire catchment area that surrounds the lake. And much of that water is going to run down, and you're going to get a lot more water coming into the lake as a result of those rainfall events. So I would propose a much more useful way of thinking about this is to not just look at the lake's area, but the volume of the lake. And with those bathymetric contours, we can integrate the volume. And I've estimated that the volume's about 10 million gallons for this lake. Now, knowing the amount of water that's delivered in a day and comparing that with the amount of water in the lake, we can calculate the residence time, or what's called the exchange time of the lake. And that's approximately 35 days. So that means about once every month or 12 times a year, the extra water that's proposed to be put in this lake is going to circulate through and turn over this lake. That says to me that we are talking about a significant volume of water here that could have a potential environmental impact. Where will that water go? What's going to happen to it? These are kettle lakes, and you can think of them as sort of a bowl, or I've shown a picture of a measuring cup here. You could pour water into this measuring cup and it's going to rise up to the surface, but eventually it will spill out. The place where it spills out is called the spill point. You can't put any more water into the cup to raise its elevation above the spill point without it spilling out. And here's another map from the Washtenaw County Map Viewer that shows some topographic contours. Here they're shown at 10-foot contour intervals, and we'll zoom in and look at 1-foot contour intervals in just a minute. But I want to look at the big picture here, and I think you can see the spill point for First Sister Lake is right over here. From there, we expect water to flow down into that little unnamed pond where it joins with water along the Sisters Lake drain, and then eventually flows out through a culvert under Wagner Road and heads on down through the so-called unnamed tributary to Honey Creek, and eventually would flow into the Huron River. So what I'd like to do now is zoom in and take a closer look at what's going on in this area on the outflow channel of the First Sister Lake. So here we have 1-foot contour intervals, which is the highest resolution that is available. And let's start up at First Sister Lake, which has an elevation of approximately 908 feet. And we can tell that because it's rimmed by the 908-foot contour, which circles it. The marshy area that sits in between also is at an elevation of approximately 908 feet. So the controlling point is down here in this saddle, which has contours of 908 feet on both sides of it and 909 feet and higher as you go up the hillside on either side. That means that this is the spill point elevation, and it probably has an elevation of about 908.5 feet, somewhere between 908 and 909 feet. So we would expect the water to flow through this path and to be controlled by that point. So the lake can't ever fill up to a level higher than that without spilling over and continuing on its way down the flow path. Well, what about flooding? A little over my depth here, but I will say that First Sister Lake does receive storm water, the runoff from the surrounding areas, which include natural areas, residential areas, and commercial areas. I know that the county drain commissioner and the storm engineers from the city have been looking into this, and I'm sure you'll receive more information from them. But I can tell you that the stormwater runoff that would come into the lake is going to greatly exceed 200 gallons per minute. It'll come in faster than that. And the water that enters the lake is either going to drain along that identified route, or some of it may infiltrate or soak into the ground. But I don't have any information on that. I can tell you that under the consent judgment, Gelman would limit flow or suspend treatment during storm events or during times of high water. And that is not difficult to implement. You could put a float in the culvert, and when it reaches a certain water level, it would send a signal to shut down the system. It's not rocket science. But the other question that comes up is, what about the downstream flow capacity? This is a picture on the right of the culvert under Wagner Road. It seems visually, at least to me, large enough to accommodate that amount of flow. I'm told there's a 6-inch board that's about 10 yards in front of this culvert that may help to control the marsh or the lake level, but it's unclear who has the authority to actually manage that if it becomes necessary. And I would also say that if you look at the current Gelman discharge into that unnamed tributary of Honey Creek, it's about 450 gallons per minute, which is far below the historical maximum of 1,200 gallons per minute. So perhaps there is additional capacity. But again, I think the county drain commissioner or the city storm engineer should weigh in on this because they're far more authoritative on this topic than I. What about the other environmental impacts? And there are several that have been questioned. First of all, isn't this a protected nature area or protected wetlands? This is in the regulatory arena, and I'm really going to defer to Eagle to answer those questions because I don't know the answer to them. What about wetlands damage? I would say if we're adding 200 gallons per minute, the wetlands are likely to get wetter or to stay wetter over periods of time. I think most of the wetlands regulations are designed to prevent draining of wetlands or filling in of wetlands. I'm not sure about adding water to wetlands. How about ice formation in winter? I think this is a real legitimate issue and question. The groundwater temperature is relatively constant at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit or thereabouts. I don't know if the treatment system would warm it up. I suspect probably not. I don't think it's going to have a long residence time in the system, but I'm only guessing there. But I can tell you this, the water that's entering is likely going to be warmer than the lake water in the winter and cooler than the lake water in the summer. So that could have an impact. And how about that rain garden that the city just finished a short time ago on the eastern side of First Sister Lake? It's a bioswale that's designed to catch and infiltrate the first inch of rainfall that runs off from several of the Lakewood subdivision streets. In this Google image, you can see I've outlined in the yellow dashed line what I think is the bioswale there. And if we compare that outline to the topographic map, you can see that the surface elevation of the bioswale is somewhere between 909 and 911 feet. And that means that it's a little bit above the lake level. I am told that it's been holding more water than anticipated. I'm not sure what the reason for that is, but the elevation suggests that it should not be flooded, even if the lake level rose by 6 inches, but its performance could still be impaired, and that should be considered and looked at. Finally, what about the dioxane contamination issues? The concentrations in the lake will potentially be affected. I want to emphasize first that it's only treated water, not untreated water, that would be released into the lake. And also that we're talking about the substance dioxane, not dioxin. Dioxin is a far more toxic chemical. Don't get them confused. This is 1,4-dioxane. I'm assuming that the NPDES discharge limit would be 7 parts per billion as the expected monthly average. If that's the case, it's below the Michigan drinking water cleanup standard. It's also below the 280 part per billion groundwater surface water interface criterion, and it's very much below the 22,000 part per billion level that has been determined to be protective of aquatic life. The discharge permit would also include bromate up to 10 parts per billion, which happens to be the EPA's bromate drinking water level. So the bottom line here is that this stuff, I think, would be acceptable under the current regulations. What about the groundwater concentrations in the area around the lake? Well, it's not clear that there would be any exchange, but there could be some. And if there were, it would have to be that the concentrations were at the same level or less. But technically, they would be considered safe under the state of Michigan standards. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you, what the legal standards are at this point in time. But I think the conclusion I would come up with here is that if this project were to go forward, that some sort of environmental monitoring and modeling are needed to support the project. And that could take place, it could take a number of different forms and could be overseen either by Eagle or the city of Ann Arbor or both. And so more questions do remain to be answered here. I'd like to move on to the question of northward migration of dioxane toward Barton Pond, where Ann Arbor gets the majority of its municipal drinking water supply. And my conclusion after looking at this several times has always been that the risk of 1,4-dioxane moving up there is small, but the potential consequences are large and we can't rule it out with complete certainty. That conclusion is very similar to those that have been reached by other independent investigators here, including Nevin Kresick with MacTech and Doug Sutton with Hydrogeologic, and most recently by Patty McCall at Tetra Tech. So I don't think I'm out in left field here, but I want to explore this a little bit more because there's continuing public concern about this. So here is a USGS topographic map that shows the contours of the surface that show the elevation. And what I want to do is zoom in on this part of the map, which shows the southern end of Barton Pond where the dam is. And if we look closely, we can see that it tells us the spillway elevation is 799 feet above sea level. That's consistent with the elevation of the contours down here on this side of the river. If we look at the river on the other side of the spillway, and here's the spillway, it's this black line right here. On the other side of the spillway, the elevation of the river is about 775 feet. That's an elevation difference of approximately 25 feet. That's what we would call in hydrology a change in head of 25 feet. So the water's 25 feet higher in Barton Pond, 25 feet lower in the river. That head difference is what drives groundwater flow. And so if there is potential for water to infiltrate or soak in the bottom of Barton Pond, it can move under the dam and it'll eventually come out and vent to the river. Groundwater always moves from high head to low head. And those flow lines are what some people might point to and say there's a natural barrier against water wanting to go into Barton Pond. And under normal circumstances in most dams, that's probably the case. But the issue here, as I see it, is that we have these lovely bluffs in Bird Hills Park. And if you look at the elevations of these, they're 950 feet above sea level, or let's zoom back out again. There's 950 feet over here in the vicinity of Skyline High School as well. And what this means is the elevation difference between the hills and the pond is about 150 feet. That's a much larger head gradient, and that can drive flow in that direction. We can see that by looking at surface flow. And what I'm going to show you now is a highlight of a surface flow feature that comes down and flows from M14 down toward Barton Pond and then takes a bend right there at the very end. This is not a groundwater flow path. This is a surface water flow path that I'm illustrating here. Over to the west of Wines School or Wines Elementary School, there are a couple more of these, but those discharge directly into Barton Pond. There's a surface water drainage divide here at about M14. Everything to the south of that flows into the Allen Creek watershed. Everything to the north flows directly on the surface down into Barton Pond. My question has always been, what is happening in the subsurface? Is there also a groundwater divide there? That means that if dioxane got into the subsurface north of, let's say, M14, west of Wines Elementary School, it could have a potential flow path down to Barton Pond. But we don't know what's there because there are no monitoring wells, and we don't know what the head differential is in the groundwater versus the surface water. So Tetra Tech looked at this in a study that was commissioned by the city. And I thought that Jared Walbert and Patty McCall did a really good job with this. This is one of the figures from their results. Notice that Barton Pond is up here in the upper right-hand corner. And these dark brown lines represent the 950-foot topographic contour elevation. And what they suggested was the need for additional wells on both sides of the surface water divide. But they recommended that these need to be installed in order to find out, number one, is dioxane present there or not? Number two, is there any aquifer? Are there some sands and gravels that would allow groundwater to flow and carry dioxane with it? And what are the water table elevations so we can figure out what the gradient is, which way groundwater would be expected to flow, and how fast? That's what these wells would be designed to figure out. They suggested that the very first well nest to be installed would be in this position here, and that the other wells would be installed contingent upon the results from the first one. So at this point, I'm going to point out that 3 of the proposed sentinel or delineation wells up in this area are positioned in these 3 spaces. And so the third one there, C, is clearly responsive to the idea or the notion that there could be a potential way for dioxane to move in this direction, and it's there to figure that out. So I think that's a good thing. The remainder of the wells are beyond the scope of the present proposed CJ, and I can't really say any more than if something were found in well C here, that it's very likely that remedial action plans could be developed, or the city could take action on its own if it chose to. But several additional wells are needed up there to put this issue to rest. That's what's required. And then the last topic that I'd like to talk about is really the big picture here. So aquifer restoration. To begin with, if you're going to restore the aquifer system to any extent, it requires mass removal of dioxane. So let's look at the history of mass removal rates in this aquifer over the years. This is a chart that shows, the bar chart that shows each individual year from 1987 to 2019. And the bars are the amount of dioxane in pounds that have been removed during each year. The gray shading down below shows the cumulative amount, which is above 100,000 pounds that have been removed. And that's a lot of dioxane that's been removed and destroyed. But I think what you can see very clearly is that the peak mass removal occurred in 2001, the year 2001, when 12,000 pounds of dioxane were removed. If you compare that to where we are now in 2019, and presumably if the CJ continues as is, in 2020 will be something similar, that's about 800 pounds, which is a reduction of more than 90%. Now, on its face, that may seem like a very terrible thing that we're removing so much less dioxane, but it's also what you would expect to happen as the law of diminishing returns kicks in and you clean up more and more of the dioxane, and it becomes harder to find and harder to remove. A lot of people are clamoring for more and more pumping to try and make up for this, but I don't think a whole lot more pumping is really going to be that productive. If we compare the amount that was pumped in 2001, that was 700 gallons per minute on average over the year, to what we're doing now, which is roughly 400 gallons per minute, that's only a 35% decrease. So why is there a 90% decrease in mass removal? It's because the amount of mass that's removed is equal to the pumping rate times the concentration of dioxane in the water that's coming out. And the concentration part is actually much more important. It's a multiplier. We want to be pumping out water with the highest concentration we can find, because that gives us the biggest bang for our buck and cleans up the aquifer system as fast as possible. Now, I've shown this, this chart in one of my video presentations, but I'll put it back up here again because it illustrates a couple things. First of all, it shows that concentrations in the extraction wells start out high and they fall and level out over time. The example I show is TW18, which starts at above 2,500 parts per billion and flatlines at about 250 parts per billion. This is going to occur for a long period of time. This is not unique to the Gallman site. This happens at sites all over the place where the law of diminishing returns comes in and we have this tailing effect. It doesn't mean that dioxane is moving around this well and moving past this well. What it means is there's some sort of continuing secondary source that is slowly releasing dioxane back into the aquifer, and the well is capturing it, but it's at a much lower concentration. Concentrations in the source area started out at anywhere from 10,000 to 200,000 parts per billion, and they're now at 2,000 parts per billion or less in most of the source area monitoring wells, with a couple of hot spots at maybe 4,000 to 6,000 parts per billion still left in the marshy area. That's actually good news and helps to explain the decrease in the mass removal rates over time. Sorry, was someone trying to interject there?
Yeah, Dr. Lemke, this is Jason Morgan. I am being encouraged to just sort of ask if maybe the remaining portion of this could move a little faster, so because we're anticipating a large amount of public comment. And I apologize for even saying that, because I know our strong ask of you and of Fred was to answer as many questions as humanly possible. And I know you're both doing that, and that is amazing and helpful. But I'm just
absolutely, Jason.
The will of my colleagues on the meeting here.
I'll try to wrap this up in 5 minutes. How's that sound?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so here's a couple of pictures of maps in the eastern area that show the concentrations. Wagner Road is along the left-hand edge. They all have the same concentration scale with the hot colors being highest. This is year by year from 2005 through 2006, 2007, etc. Another 4 years, and finally up through 2017. And I think what you can see is over time, the colors are getting lighter because the concentrations are going down. The maximum concentrations in the eastern area have decreased from about 10,000 parts per billion to less than 2,000 parts per billion, with a few remaining hotspots. And that apparent decrease in mass that you see is about 4,000 kilograms or 8,800 pounds, which can't be accounted for by, it's more than what we've removed by pump and treat. I'm not sure why. We don't know the whole answer there, but it's not consistent with a dilution idea. Dilution would have the same amount of mass just spread out over a larger area. We've already heard how the Part 201 provisions are a virtual smorgasbord of choices for GSI compliance for polluters. For this reason, the reduction of mass in the aquifer system is probably the most viable strategy for ensuring that we don't exceed the GSI non-compliance criterion. I'll show this picture of the plume in the eastern area. The idea is we've got the central plume axis migrating toward the Allen Creek. If we take the hot spots out, the concentrations that move in that direction would be less. There's another reason for removing hot spots as well, and that's because of the process of diffusion, which moves dioxane mass from areas of high concentration out toward low concentration. In other words, toward the boundaries of the Prohibition Zone. And if we take the hot spots out, that decreases the concentration gradient and decreases that potential movement of dioxane. Finally, we'll talk about the pumping rates. They're going to go from 450 to maybe 650 gallons per minute. There are some differences between my estimates and Dan Bicknell's estimates here. I think those differences are due to the fact that I'm expecting Gelman wells that are pumping now to continue unless they are approved for discontinuance, and I doubt that's going to happen. I'm also including the Park Lake well here. But more importantly, the mass removal rate is probably going to go from somewhere around 800 pounds per year to maybe 2,500 pounds per year. That will only happen, though, if the Park Lake well comes on and is operational. It's important to keep that in mind. If we did that, the 2,500 is not going to restore things to where it was during the peak, but it's going to make significantly more progress than what we're making right now under the third consent judgment. Finally, I'd like to explore this aspirational goal that everyone has of restoring the aquifer to pristine conditions. I've said publicly that I don't think this is feasible. So what about reducing the concentrations to 7.2 parts per billion everywhere? Well, I'd like to remind everybody who's still listening that there are a couple points in Gelman's history that are important here. Back in the year 2000, Judge Sheldon ordered that the entire site be cleaned up to 85 parts per billion or less in 5 years. Pumping ramped up, more mass was removed than originally was even estimated to have been present, but we didn't get anywhere near 85 parts per billion. So as a result, 4 years later, Gelman found themselves doing a feasibility study to evaluate alternatives to remediate the E plume, which is that main plume in the eastern area. The MDEQ's selected remedy at that time was aggressive pumping and treating along Wagner Road and Maple Road. And Technical Outreach Services for Communities, which was a service offered by Michigan State University, reviewed the EAGLE recommendation or the MDEQ recommendation and advocated for hydraulic capture and pump and treat at the then known leading edge of the plume. That was the aggressive cleanup strategy that was possible at that time, but unfortunately those proposals were not embraced by the public, and in 2005, we got the institutional control that was imposed by the court instead. In my professional opinion, I don't think that remediation to 7.2 parts per billion is feasible, even if someone like the EPA were to adopt it as a goal. I kind of find it ironic that the 2004 feasibility study is being used to suggest that this would be possible. My response to that suggestion is that that was then and this is now. At that time, the standard was 85 parts per billion. Now it's 7.2, which means a much larger area needs to be addressed. And 16 years have elapsed since then, and the plume has moved on. It really saddens me to say this, but the opportunity to capture the main plume in the eastern area has passed. So where does that leave us? Two authorities are offering different expert opinions on this matter. I think that what is really needed is some sort of an independent reality check. As I read through the many thoughtful comments and questions that the public has submitted so far, it struck me that there weren't any responses from environmental professionals who live or work in Ann Arbor, and there are many of them. We have Tetra Tech and Limnatech and ECT and Bar Engineering and Geosyntech and others. So my question is, where are your voices? They need to be heard. And Ryan Stanton and David Fair, who have done a tremendous job covering Gelman developments throughout the years. If you're listening to this, I hope that your headline tomorrow is going to be something like, the expert urges Ann Arbor's environmental professionals to weigh in on the Gelman CJ. It's important that the members of the City Council and the Washtenaw Board of Commissioners and the Scioto Township Board of Trustees hear from you, because you have some expertise and some perspective. I guess what I'm asking is, based on what you know about the size and the complexity of this site, is aquifer restoration to 7.2 parts per billion a realistic goal? Let us know what you think. So now I'll conclude. Jason, here's my last slide. In my estimation, the revised CJ is not perfect. I've said that. It doesn't stop migration in the eastern area or aim to completely restore the aquifer system. What it does is it builds upon the existing framework that's in place that has evolved over the past 30 years. It does require activities that are both sensible and beneficial, and chief among these are remediation in the source zone, removal of mass of dioxane in the hotspots, evaluation of the groundwater surface water interface in the eastern and western areas, and putting monitoring wells in important new locations. And if you view it in that framework or that respect, I think that the revised CJ does represent an improvement over what is in place now. Whether that's enough of an improvement for you all to approve it or not, I don't know. It's your call. But to say that it's a step backward, I think is not correct at all. And with that, I will conclude my presentation and happily answer any other questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Lemke. I know we want to make sure that we get to the public comment piece, and I think you've thoroughly answered a lot of the questions that came in to us since last week. I think there's just one question that I will ask based on what has come to me, and then I will certainly expect us to have more questions following this meeting. But the one big question that came to me was regarding First Sister Lake, and you spent a lot of time talking about that as an area of concern and sort of talking about how that would play out. But the question that was asked is there a viable alternative to discharge into First Sister Lake? Maybe if that's a question that you perhaps know the answer to.
Well, that's a tough question to answer, and I have to be careful not to step over the confidentiality line here. I can't say whether there is actually a viable alternative or not. There are alternatives that can and should be considered, but the alternative that made its way into the consent judgment is the discharge of treated water into First Sister Lake. There are hurdles and problems with every single solution that you might want to propose for this. Nothing is easy. Other potential solutions might include a pipeline back to the Gelman treatment site. They might include re-injection of that water back down into the aquifer after it's been treated. It might be piping it to somewhere else. Another option is using the city's sanitary sewer. All of those have problems that are associated with them. There's no silver bullet here. Every environmental solution has a trade-off. There is an upside and a downside to every single one of those. And I really can't say more than that, other than the one that is incorporated and is under consideration right now is the discharge of 200 gallons per minute of treated water into the surface water system at First Sister Lake. Hopefully I didn't get myself in trouble, Fred or Bob.
I'm
No.
sure they'll yell at you later. Great, thank you very much for addressing that question. And then let's see, I think there was one other question that came in afterwards as well, and that was regarding the eastern boundary zone and whether we had abandoned a goal of preventing expansion beyond the eastern boundary. I don't know if that's more of a question for you or Fred or Bob, but that was one other question that I don't think was addressed in there.
So do you mean the Prohibition Zone boundary?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that that goal has been abandoned. I don't think that, well, first of all, the Prohibition Zone boundary is being expanded, right? So the goal perhaps is changed to preventing migration of dioxane at 7.2 parts per billion or greater beyond the expanded Prohibition Zone boundary. I think that's still in place. And there are triggers that come into play if concentrations rise in any of the sentinel or boundary wells that are designed to detect that. And there are actions that would come into place after that as well that are designed to prevent that from ever happening. So the sentinel wells are supposed to provide early detection, and then there is a process that is undertaken by Gelman under the supervision of Eagle that is meant to investigate and correct that situation if they think it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you. And we do, I know two participants here have raised hands, Councilman Hayner and Trustee Knoll. I think our plan here was for us to sort of consolidate questions here for efficiency and to not sort of have all of us asking questions. So I'm not sure what to do with that. Dr. Lemke, are you comfortable taking more questions, or should we, or would you rather us move to public comment and then come back to you with specific questions from members of the boards here at a later time?
I'm here to help answer questions in whatever way I can. I'll leave that to you and to the attorneys who are my guides in this to keep me out of trouble as well. Whatever
Jason,
your constituents
Jason,
need.
Bob Davis here. Why don't you go forward with those questions?
Okay, so I will very directly ask my colleagues here if we can ask sort of direct questions and not sort of give statements just for the sake of all of us here. So I will first move to Trustee Knoll.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this will be very direct. And it pulls together something that Fred said and something that Larry Lemke said. When Fred was speaking, he talked about the sentinel wells. And my question is, these sentinel wells may not detect the 1,4-dioxane before it reaches homeowner wells, based on something that Larry Lemke said in terms of the spacing of the wells. And I would like Larry to comment on that.
Yep, this is a tough one.
I know.
You know, as a scientist, I always want more information. As public officials, I think you probably always want more certainty and more protection. In this endeavor that we're in, we are peering into the subsurface, trying to look underground, but we don't have X-ray eyes like Superman, so we can't see and know everything that's going down there. What we have are a few points where we've drilled holes, boreholes into the ground that give us concrete information about what's down there. But in the aquifer system, things can change rapidly from place to place. So the question becomes, how closely do these monitoring wells need to be placed? Doug Sutton, when he looked at this earlier, his recommendation was a minimum spacing of about 500 feet apart. That's consistent with some of the geostatistical modeling that we've done in my research. Doesn't seem like a bad number, but I'd like to see them spaced even more closely if we potentially could. But it's not feasible, or it's not practical either. You can't just have a pincushion of wells everywhere to know exactly what's going on underground. There's a cost-benefit relationship between additional investigation and the amount of information you get. Certainly, the best approach would be to have a well maybe every 100 foot if you could, but that's not realistic and it's not done anywhere to my knowledge. So we rely on the information that we have from the monitoring wells. The new Sentinel wells that are being put in place at the northern boundary of the Prohibition Zone, for instance, are specifically designed to minimize the spacing or to fill some of the gaps in the spacing between the existing monitoring wells as well. So can you ever have complete assurance? No, not even with 100 more monitoring wells if we were able to put them in. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilman Hayner.
This is for Mr. Lemke. Is there an environmental or hydrological prohibition or consideration on the placement of the Park Lake discharge? In other words, can it be, is there something either environmentally or hydrologically preventing it from being piped elsewhere? Or is it possible that this is just the cost benefit to the polluter as part of their cleanup? They feel is prohibitively expensive to build a pipeline elsewhere. Is there a better place to put it that isn't our sanitary sewers?
Okay, there's a couple elements to that question. One is an engineering element. I don't think that there would be engineering constraints that would prevent lifting that water and letting it flow into a different direction or a different pipeline. I think that that could be solved in an engineering way. I've heard some suggestions about running just a pipe through the wetlands over to the other side and discharging into the culvert by Wagner Road. That would have some perhaps environmental or regulatory constraints because it could have an impact on the marshland. Again, there are trade-offs to these questions. I can't talk about the process that we went through, or I shouldn't say we, that was gone through for looking at different alternatives and options. All I can say is this is the one that's included and is on the plate right now. That does not mean that it's impossible to do something different. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay, I'll take that
Take that as a yes.
Yes, and I will try and keep us moving. Thank you very much, Dr. Lemke and Fred. And I want to be clear, I know there are some more questions that have come in, and we certainly will want to make sure we get answers to questions that weren't addressed. So if folks in the public want to continue to submit questions via those email addresses, please do that, and we'll try and make sure that we follow up with more answers as well. So the next, let's see. So the next portion of our meeting will be a public hearing moderated by Congresswoman Dingell. And I have the responsibility of laying the sort of ground rules for that as well. So we'll move forward here. Thank you to Fred and Dr. Lemke. I will virtually turn the gavel over to Congresswoman Dingell, who will moderate the public hearing portion of this evening's meeting. And to ensure, I just want to remind everybody to ensure that you've renamed yourself to something that is your name so that our staff can know to call on you if you are a member of the public who'd like to submit public comment. And we ask the public to utilize the hand raise feature on Zoom to let our team know that you'd like to make a comment. For those who are joining us by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. And a clear reminder, we have a 3-minute time limit, and we ask that you share your name and place of residence at the start of your comments. Crystal will recognize you and let you know that your mic is active, and she'll keep track of time. We will pretty strictly cut you off at 3 minutes. We apologize in advance, and at 3.5 minutes, Crystal will cut your mic. So I'm very, very sorry. That sounds harsh, but we have to do it to make sure we hear from everybody tonight. So we thank you for your patience, as there are quite a few attendees in the meeting. Our team will work to identify each and every one of you so that you can make sure that you have a chance to make your comment. I'd like to emphasize any questions asked during the public hearing portion will not be answered directly. So if you ask a question during public comment, it won't be answered directly, but we'll try and follow up with an answer after the meeting tonight. So, I will turn the gavel over to Congresswoman Dingell. Oh, maybe she's muted. Let's see.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you. We want to quickly get to the public comments because this is about hearing from people. So Crystal, you've got the lead in reality.
Very good. First up is Maz HG. Your mic is active.
Hello, I hope everybody can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Mojgan Sababi Esfahani and Dr. Limki. I am an environmental toxicologist. Appalled at this phony proposal. After many years of secret negotiations with Gelman, we are being offered a laughable proposal that continues to protect the polluter, leaving the public in the ditch. This supposed negotiation has been a total waste of public's time and resources. The most elementary rights of the public have been trampled upon in this proposal. By this agreement, Gelman needs not release any studies of the contamination that remains at the core site. This alone should be enough to reject this hilarious proposal altogether. Mayor Taylor has said that he's excited about this agreement with Gelman. The rest of us are not so excited, Mr. Mayor. We are insulted. Yes, we are insulted. Your excited agreement with Gelman is a slap in the face of every resident in Ann Arbor who has had to endure living with this contamination for decades, while our elected representatives hobnob with the polluter and after years of secret talks with the polluter, get ready to abandon the public altogether. If the prospects of cutting a mega break for Gelman is exciting to you, Mr. Mayor, well, it's not so exciting to us. To those who in good faith believe EPA is the answer to Gelman contamination, I say this. The EPA told us they are awfully slow. They told us even a feasibility study to determine whether or not the EPA will take on the task would take decades, all the while the plume would be spreading as it is today. The dioxane contamination of our waters is the result of a massive long-term system failure, a gigantic system failure that has harmed the public and enriched the polluters. Let us face these failures of the American system and take a route less traveled, a route that will deliver clean water and clean environment to the thousands of people in this town instead of delivering massive wealth to the already wealthy and powerful. Stop kicking the can, put a millage to the public, and clean up this fiasco before geological changes make it impossible to do anything about it. Clean it up right now. I am Dr. Mojgan Sababi Esfahani, an environmental toxicologist.
Thank you. Her time was up at 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Next up, you have Sally Booth Swadron. Sally, your mic is.
This was a mistake. I did not have anything prepared at this time, but thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Dan Bicknell. Dan, your mic is active. You may unmute yourself. Your mic is active to do that.
I'm sorry. My name is Dan Bicknell. I'm a Washtenaw County resident and president of Global Environment Alliance. The proposed Fourth Amendment consent judgment is a continuation of the current CJ dilution remedy, which will not stop the dioxane plume from expanding towards Ann Arbor Township wells, Scioto Township wells, Barton Hill Village wells, or Barton Pond. The shallow plume will continue to travel through the city unabated. The consent judgment is not protective of public health and the environment. The consent judgment says that the Prohibition Zone objective is to prevent groundwater contamination migrating beyond the Prohibition Zone boundary, but it allows Gelman or Eagle to ask the court to expand the Prohibition Zone boundary with only additional data. It does not require, first, that Gelman take all necessary actions to halt the plume, as Mr. Dindorfer said. And I just ask people to please read the CJ section 5A2F to completely understand that. The CJ says that you have to have a groundwater interface value of 280 to be attained. Instead, rather, they're allowing a mixing zone-based groundwater surface water interface value, which will be much greater than 280. The CJ says that a remedial contingency plan must be developed to stop the dioxane from going beyond the Prohibition Zone boundary, but the remedial contingency plan allows Gelman to just extend the Prohibition Zone boundary with no additional actions to stop the groundwater expansion. The CJ allows institutional controls and land use restrictions to be placed on private property owner drinking water wells, which become contaminated with dioxane. This allows the taking of private property rights for the sole financial benefit of the polluter, Gelman. Overall, the Prohibition Zone expansion provision, the implementation of institutional land use restrictions, and the municipal water connection plan provision all work together to allow Gelman and Eagle to expand the Prohibition Zone, place institutional controls on private landowner drinking water wells, and provide the homeowner with a municipal water supply. The CJ is again about taking private owners' rights to use their well. It should be rather about halting the dioxane plume and preserving the aquifer so the private landowner can use the well. In 2016, we organized a meeting with US EPA, and it had Joan Tanaka at it, the same person in the 2018 meeting. And she said specifically and put in writing that US EPA would halt the dioxane plume migration and restore the aquifer to drinking water criteria if it became a US EPA Superfund site. Mr. Dindorfer was very selective in his quotations from US EPA in the 2020 meeting. The 2040 Gelman-owned feasibility study said that the groundwater extraction and treatment to drinking water criteria was technically infeasible.
Thank you, Dan. 3 minutes is up. We hate to cut people off, but we're really going to abide by that. Next up is Vince Caruso. Vince, you should unmute yourself, but you're able to do that.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. My name is Vince Caruso. I live at 556 Glendale Circle, founder and board member of CARD.
Vince, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Now we can hear you.
For some reason, it muted me. I'm not sure why. So my name is Vince Caruso, 556 Glendale Circle, founder and board member of CARD, founder and coordinating member for the Alums Creek Watershed Group, former executive board member for the Sierra Club Huron Valley Group. The Alums Creek Group does not support the proposed CJ. We support Ann Arbor Township's unanimous vote to reject the proposed CJ, and Roger Rail and Dan McNell and many others who will reject the CJ. Biggest reason Dr. Lemke supports the proposed CJ is high cost and neighborhood disturbance, according to his writing. EPA will take care of the cost when they do the cleanup. Danaher is a $140 billion company, and they can be required to make a full cleanup and pay for it under EPA. We have much less disruptive cleanup methods that are available, like Hypox trailers at 50 gallons per minute to treat to non-detect. Danaher is on the hook for this cleanup, according to several comments made by Mitch Edelman, DEQ, Eagle, staff member in MDEQ public meetings, several public meetings when he was asked. The current CJ is actually a better cleanup than the proposed CJ, which has several unacceptable restrictions. Proposed extraction wells miss a lot of high concentration locations according to well maps shown by Roger Rell. I like to say that during the 2016 town hall, there was a comment that Barton Pond has a blocking agent by the DEQ. A week later at a card meeting, we asked Larry Lemke about the blocking agent at Barton Pond. He said, absolutely not. There is no blocking agent. In fact, there's a preferred path into Barton. He's changed his position for some reason, but I'm not sure why. I think we're giving up way too many rights and for this petition. And I think we need to be able to ask Superfund if we need it. Enlarging Prohibition Zone for a third time and potentially many more times is not appropriate, should not be allowed. Taking away Maple Road containment rule will allow the plume to move through the city unacceptably, especially move through up into Ann Arbor Township. Basically, 500 part per billion cleanup standard is a non-starter. Ann Arbor Charter Township wells to the north are not protected due to lack of monitoring wells. Lower down high concentration aquifers will crosstalk with the near surface aquifers. And potentially expose homeowners in their basements on the west side, where we already have 22 part per billion in West Park. I think we need to make sure we're not exposing homeowners unnecessarily. This CJ, revised CJ, is basically a low-cost exit route for Danaher and Gilman, with a partial cleanup and no further action required by law. Not polluter pay, but polluter public pay for the pollution in our formerly pristine groundwater aquifer. I think we really need to think this clearly and make sure we're not putting Ann Arborites and other residents at risk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vince. Next up is Sally Booth Schwarzenegger. Sally, you should be able to unmute yourself. Sally, are you there?
You keep calling on me and I don't have a prepared statement. Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can, and okay, that I'm just being given your name. Nancy
Okay.
Schiffler is next.
Okay, my name's Nancy Schiffler. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Sierra Club, the local group, and our comments are basically that the CJ provides, it's not sufficient what it's providing. It's limited gains to the interveners and the communities and requiring minimal changes on the part of what Gelman is currently doing. The dilution and dispersion strategy remains rather than a more aggressive cleanup. The treatment short of best management practices remains. The extraction procedures and rates appear to be accommodating existing Gelman equipment rather than identifying the most effective procedures and the equipment needed for that. We are particularly concerned about the treated water being discharged into First Sister Lake in the absence of effective studies of the impact on the health of the lake. And we're also concerned with the agreements that basically the interveners would be required to submit an order of dismissal, terminating their right to participate directly in the CJ, and also basically an agreement not to support any requests to the EPA for Superfund status. After 4 years of negotiations, we are still not far from where we were when the process started. Gelman and Eagle are still focused on dilution and dispersion. And the new effort at First Sister Lake has unknown impact on the lake. The plume will continue to migrate toward the Huron River and possibly the city's drinking water source. And we will once again be unable to participate in the CJ. And our basic feeling is that these conditions are not a sufficient outcome for years of negotiations. If we accept this amended CJ, we will be locked into a process with minimal gains and at the same time locked out of any meaningful role directing the change. We urge the interveners to reject this consent judgment as it is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next, James Damore. James.
Good evening, Congresswoman. Can you hear me?
I can, great.
Wonderful. My name is James Damore, and I'm a member of CARD. I became involved fairly recently through the auspices of the Sierra Club several years ago. I, like Nancy Schiffler, was on the Sierra Club River Valley Group Executive Committee when we formally petitioned the federal government, along with Ann Arbor and South Townships, to have the EPA make a preliminary assessment to have the Gelman Plume declared a Superfund site. That was 4 years ago. As you know, the standard for 1.4 dioxane was on review then, and with that, the interveners were interested in having a role in the negotiation new consent judgment, which is here before you. I agree with Nancy, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on legal fees, and it appears that the proposed fourth consent judgment does not bring us any closer to cleaning up the plume. In fact, it gives Danaher the ability to walk away from the mess. If this is accepted, local governments waive their rights to petition the US EPA for complete cleanup. So we have the prospects of a larger exclusion zone with as much or even possibly less cleanup than before. Despite Danaher itself possessing through one of its enterprises UV technology that can treat contaminated aquifers non-detect, the consent judgment does not mandate best management practices. I have lobbied before you personally and on behalf of the Sierra Club that the current consent judgment will not protect Ann Arbor's drinking water and the environment, and that the best course of action would be involving US EPA oversight and action with legal in providing that Danaher, a responsible party with the ability to pay for cleanup, to solve this problem to clean up the plume to non-detect levels and using best management practices. We passed these resolutions in 2016 around the time of the national election. There have been questions raised about the US EPA's effectiveness in these trying national times. I can understand the reluctance of some of you in going this route on this basis. I want to respond to something that Mr. Dinderhoff said. I respectfully disagree that the EPA will set the timetable back. We've done a much preliminary work with CARD and doing much of the investigative work before us. The EPA will be further along in its efforts in taking action. That being said, so be it if you don't like having the Prasco EPA involved. While I disagree with that notion, absent the EPA, is this the best deal our attorneys could have gotten for our community? Is this all that was possible, or was it that Danaher's legal team is that intransigent? Too many questions and not enough transparency. Furthermore, it's come to my attention that city employees working on these issues are instructed by the Ann Arbor City Attorney's Office and his deputy not to answer questions related to the plume. I find this development troubling and frankly inappropriate. The public has the right to know, but I find this focal too true, particularly in the fact that each policymaker in this call was not in the negotiations and have been presented with a take it or leave it tack. All of us deserve better than this. And while many of my best friends are lawyers, and there are some good ones amongst you here, if we are not going to involve the EPA, then
Noah, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is, wait a minute, I'm sorry. It's Noah Moore. No, was that Noah?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me? There you go.
Yep. Hi, my name is Noah Moore, and my wife, Infant, and I are new residents to Scioto Township, and I'm very concerned by this settlement for the health of my family. It seems to me that this settlement does not put the health and safety of residents that are using well water on the edge of the plume first. This settlement is a reactive approach rather than being proactive in protecting those of us on the edge of the plume. I am located an eighth of a mile from the edge of the plume, so really close according to the maps I've looked at. And those of us on the edge have our wells tested about every 2 years. So this means that my wife, my 6-month-old daughter, and I could be drinking water contaminated by dioxane for up to 2 years between tests. I understand if the well did test positive, then they would react to the newly found dioxane and fix the problem by converting my water over to municipal water. but this does not seem like a solution that puts residents living on the edge of a growing plume's health first. I would expect a solution to be proactive in protecting our health. I believe residents with wells on the edge of the plume should be hooked up to city water or protected in some way before the dioxane enters our homes, not after the dioxane enters our homes. A proactive response that values residents' health would stay a block or so in front of this plume. I'm hearing everyone say they care about the health and safety of us affected by this plume, but this settlement does not protect us. I want to know what is going to be done to protect my 6-month-old daughter from this dioxane for up to 2 years between tests, and how can someone both vote in favor of this settlement and still say that they actually care about their residents' health? Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. The next person who's up has a phone number that ends in 9644. Somebody have a phone number, 9644?
Yes, my name is Kathy Boris, and I live at 1726 Charlton in Ann Arbor. Dear local officials, I imagine what most people want is a complete cleanup of the Gelman plume. But what we are being offered in the fourth consent judgment is a roadmap for letting Gelman off the hook in the quickest and least expensive manner possible. Dan Bicknell and Roger Rail, in their presentations to the Scioto Township Board 2 days ago, were thorough in explaining how CJ4 will benefit Gelman while failing to halt the expansion of the dioxane plume. And they explained that that must be our goal, to stop the expansion of the dioxane plume. Before dioxane somehow migrates into the main source of our drinking water, which is Barton Pond. Because I cannot compete with the expert explanations of Dan Bicknell and Roger Rail, I will simply add my voice to the voices of those who have already spoken or written letters asking local officials to reject CJ4. And I would like to remind you, our local officials, that when you vote to reject CJ4, you will be simultaneously voting to preserve First Sister Lake in its present pristine condition, to preserve our right to take Gelman back to court, to preserve our right to petition the EPA for Superfund status, and to value the public health of our community and our environment over the profits of a corporation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this meeting, and I hope you will reject CJ4.
Thank you for your comments. Next up is Alex W.
Thank you all for your time. My name is Alexander Weinstein, and I'm a resident of Ann Arbor and Scioto Township. Congresswoman, you spoke passionately about leaving this land better than we found it and being stewards of the land. This settlement is not a step in that direction, and I'm asking all interveners to reject the CJ and vote against it. I was brought into this discussion because I'm a homeowner at 523 Lakeview Avenue. I live on Sister Lake, second Sister Lake, within walking distance of First Sister Lake, and I have a well that would be directly affected by this settlement. As well, I have children who would be directly affected by this awful document. The document gives the polluter permission to dump carcinogens of dioxane and bromate directly into the Sister Lake through the Park Lake well as one of its methods for disposing of the cleanup. This is a horrible, completely unacceptable solution, one that endangers me directly. It endangers my children, my community, our wetlands. When I became a homeowner, I was thankful to know that my well and the lake has reported 0 dioxane every year. And I expect and continue to expect that Ann Arbor and Scioto Township will do everything they can to protect these lakes and the community that lives by the lakes. The Park Lake well by design directly pumps carcinogens into the lake. It'll be destroying a lake that presently has 0 dioxane. Most importantly, there is a viable alternative. A pipeline can be run to the Gelman treatment site. It would be a cost, but a completely reasonable one. Much more reasonable than directly introducing pollutants to a lake that has none. I come to you as someone who has children, who lives on the lake. My life, my children's lives, my neighbors, my families, and their children will be directly impacted in an awful way if you pass this. Furthermore, this document is cleverly worded legal document that benefits the polluter, protecting their rights, and doesn't support the present or future victims of the polluter. This is a deeply unethical document, and a settlement is unacceptable to me. And once again, I'm asking you to reject this settlement. Tonight, we heard from supporters of the current CJ. They were given the most allotted time of almost an hour each, while presentations from the opposing side, particularly Dan Bicknell and Roger Ill, have only been given 3 minutes, and they did not receive the same time or slideshow capability. I'll mention that Dan Bicknell's name was cited many times because of his in-depth and excellent presentation on Tuesday night when taking apart this awful document. And I would ask for a way to give him the time to present his comments in full to you, particularly with Congresswoman Dingell present. As for tonight's longest presenters, there were many times when I heard vague language. We were asked to accept that adding carcinogens to Sister Lake be allowed because technically it would be safe. There was a note about separating Danaher from Gelman and the difficulty of holding them responsible because it would require significant legal work. But this is not a reason not to pursue this. Let us do that legal work rather than excuse it. Similarly, the reason for not seeking EPA was a fear that there might not be a significant enough danger, but there is a significant danger. The plume is and has been spreading for decades, and this CJ will not stop the spread. I found the question by Kathleen Knoll about sentinel wells to be excellent, but it wasn't answered. I heard words like cost benefit and how there's no universal solution, and this avoided the question of the danger for homeowners. And I also found the answer to Jeff Hayner's question about the plan to dump directly into the Sister Lake.
Alex, 3 minutes is up.
Okay, I'm almost done. It's a trade-off to be deeply disturbing. I ask you to reject this document on behalf of all the people who count on you to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I am going to say that I do think that that's a fair point on making sure that there's balance of time. I don't know how to even it up. I'm also going to say, I'm going to make one comment. I think everybody should have the same access to scientific data, and it should be transparent. I'm just going to say that point blank. I know I'm probably going to get in trouble with some of the people, but if this agreement's based on scientific data and all of the elected officials are going to be transparent, then I think that data should be, I'm sorry, but I am going to say that. Okay, I'm now in trouble. Next up, the number ending in 0556.
Hi, Ralph McKee, 1116 Red Oak, Ann Arbor, north of West Park. I've lived in Ann Arbor for almost 50 years. I'm not a scientist or environmental activist. I'm a mostly retired lawyer. Coincidentally, at my former firm, beginning in the 90s, I used to co-counsel cases, usually insolvencies, with Mike Caldwell of the Zausmer firm, who represents Danaher. Mike's a very good lawyer. He's a tough negotiator. He's had the advantage of working on this for 30 years. So I have some idea of the challenge faced by counsel for interveners. I want to focus on the legal issues and how they've been framed so far. The materials that I've reviewed, including the videos done by Mr. Lemke, explain the background and the major new items, but I haven't seen anything significant on the other major item that should be included in any analysis of a litigation settlement, which is what happens if you litigate. I assume that's been conveyed to the elected officials. I don't know that for sure, but I would assume that. But it hasn't been conveyed to anybody in the public. I understand there are privilege and tactical reasons not to divulge the details, but to not even give an outline is going to result in a flawed process. Maybe litigation makes no sense, maybe it does. Please tell us. And this would be in the interim before the EPA got involved, if they did. That concern's magnified because even a cursory review of the consent judgment, settlement agreement, and the dismissal order reveals that we'd be giving up a lot, waiver of claims, and the right to ask for EPA cleanup. Mr. Dindoffer says claims under the 2006 settlement agreement are preserved. I think there's a serious question as to whether Section 4B2A would eviscerate that. I would encourage you to read that very carefully. The right to participate as an intervener is limited too, and I guess our trust in EGLE is low given that there's no guarantee that future state administrations won't rein them in. That's certainly happened before. And there's at least a component of the proposed remediation process that creates a whole new set of problems. That's for Sister Lake. There's no studies. What happens if that goes bad? What are our remedies? I didn't hear any discussion of that yet. Next, I believe Mayor Taylor should recuse himself. There's a conflict of interest. His law firm represents Scioto Township. He says he has no financial interest. So I'll take his word for that. But his law firm management generally frowns on partners who criticize other partners, even implicitly in public. So he's got a large disincentive to objectively critique this and vote on this settlement. Finally, I have heard that some county commissioners have openly expressed that they're sick of hearing from CARD. Candidly, those commissioners ought to be ashamed of themselves if they did say that. The CARD people have carefully studied this problem. They should be respected. If you're not prepared to listen to them with an open mind, you should resign your seat today. Thank you.
Okay, let's, no personal attacks. We all got to talk to each other, but I respect that. Jason, I'm now told that there are no more hands. So quickly, we'll say to anybody, if there's anybody else on this call that does want to say something, now is your opportunity. Raise your hand. Sally, you hands up again, but we're assuming that you don't want to talk, so we're not going to call on you. And Elizabeth Collins, you're now up.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm sorry, I thought I had my hand raised. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. My name is Beth Collins. I live right on the western side of First Sister Lake on Porter Ave. Mine was the neighborhood that we were drinking the dioxane in our wells for many years, probably, until it was discovered. We were annexed into the city and forced off of our wells. So when you talk about these homeowners, and the CJ does mention it quite a few times, the contingency for putting people on municipal water, that does not include them having to pay for the sewer hookup like we all had to pay. It does not include their new Ann Arbor water rates, which are extremely high. And I really feel for these people on wells, Noah and Alexander, who called in. I also heard from a lot of environmental professionals tonight, and there are many within CARD, and many environmental activists. And so I'm sorry that you guys feel that, that they're not represented. I would like to hear more information from county and city, because even though Dr. Lemke did a great presentation, he said many times he doesn't really know, or it's not his area of expertise. So for 3 weeks now, I've been asking questions to the city, to the county, to everybody. And how come I don't hear any of those answers to the First Sister Lake questions? I heard tonight that significant water will make a significant impact. I heard tonight that, yes, it could affect the protected wetlands. I heard tonight, though, that they probably won't clean up this hot spot if they can't get an NPDES permit to discharge the water. So right there, you take that 200 gallons per minute out of your equation. I had also asked a question that wasn't answered to everybody and to Eagle, that I believe they have tried to do discharge into this First Sister Lake before and were denied. Maybe it wasn't a permit or what. I heard the city of Ann Arbor denied them the wetlands permit, or maybe it never even got that far. So basically, just maybe you should take that out of your equation. And I definitely think you need to reject this CJ. If the temperature could impact the lake, the many things. I take that little footbridge that goes over the spill point that Dr. Lemke pointed out on the map. And I don't think that I'll be able to use that with that flow of water going there. So I'm basically cut off from my city nature area and my city park. I know that sounds very selfish, but I should have access to my walks. I'm sorry. So the rain garden could be impacted. A lot of ifs here still. The tree tissue monitoring and testing, who's going to pay?
Beth, your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Nope, thank you. Next, Shanna Milkey.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shanna Milkey. I'm a concerned citizen of Ann Arbor and a member of CARD. I live on Keenly Court, 1 block north of the current Prohibition Zone northern boundary. I'm very disappointed in the proposed settlement and urge my local elected officials to reject it. Some of the many problematic aspects of this consent judgment proposal are the circular reasoning that expanding the Prohibition Zone is necessary because the current Prohibition Zone would not be in compliance with the updated 7.2 parts per billion drinking water standard. Gelman knew years ago that the standard had been tightened yet chose to do nothing about it. Expanding the current prohibition zone effectively rewards Gelman for delaying negotiations. The loss of the Maple Road containment objective that was in the third consent judgment. The reasoning is that the plume is not at 2,800 parts per billion now, but instead of striking that provision, I think we should keep it and change the limit to 280 parts per billion. Other people have spoken about the discharge of water to First Sister Lake. I agree that that is an unconscionable step to take. Dr. Lemke suggests that environmental monitoring and modeling are needed to determine the impacts, but if it's not in the consent judgment, then it's not going to happen. I'm very concerned that local governments would lose their continuing rights if they solicit EPA Superfund intervention. And I'm also concerned about the release of claims section in the city, county, and Scioto Township settlement documents. We don't know what we'll have to deal with in the future, so it seems unwise to limit our options. In sum, I request my local elected officials to reject this proposed settlement. Instead, I urge Eagle to ask Judge Connors for an emergency order to enforce the current consent judgment at the 7.2 drinking water standard and 280 parts per billion GSI standard. While that is ongoing, I think the community should simultaneously pursue the Superfund petition option and go to court to achieve a remediation plan that truly protects public health and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. Next up, Roger Ailes.
Good evening, everyone. This year starts my 28th year watching over the Gelman site as an unpaid citizen volunteer. This proposal must be rejected. The lack of transparency that we've seen when we talk about what were the reasons for some of these items in the proposal is enough by itself to reject this proposal. There's no supporting data and analysis that must have been done in order to come up with some of these ideas. Those also have not. I would also ask that immediately release all the questions that were sent in to the various websites in preparation for and release those unfiltered. What we got was an amalgamation of those questions, and I would like to see the unfiltered questions. Remember sending in some pointed questions that didn't seem to get answered. I would like to see immediate release, full slide decks from Fred and Larry. Those should be already on the website if they're not. I'd like to see that. I'd like to invite people who haven't had a chance to get the details on this to go to srsw.org, our Scioto Residents for Safe Water, of which I'm a co-founder and chair. We've been posting things since 1995 about this site. And all the information about these current meetings and videos are there in one place. Speaking of videos, I went back to the video of the first meeting I attended back in 1993. This was when the company wanted to dump 100 parts per billion into the tributary. You've already seen that we've had detectable levels of dioxane in Barton Pond from discharging up to 7 parts per billion. If that had been 100 parts per billion discharge, you would have had 14 times that, right? We prevailed in scuttling that plant. And Fred, you remember, we had to go to contested case to actually win that part of the contested case where the company wanted to go to 60 or 100 parts per billion, and we got the judge to bring it down to 5. Now, why did it end up as 7 or 10? Because it went to the Engler's director of the DEQ at the time, who had no citizen oversight, and he just changed it willy-nilly without any support. So looking at that early video, I'm seeing history repeat itself.
Roger, your time is up. Oh, okay, they're very whatever. Someone whose number ends in 4464. Someone there whose number ends in 4464? Okay. Then Jackie Corteau.
Hello, my name is
Jackie, you're cutting out. Jackie, is your
Can
mic
you hear
on?
me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, it said I was unmuted. My name is Jackie Corteau. I'm a SIO resident at 4241 Tubbs. I am an ecologist by training and trade, and I did want to follow up on the point about phyto remediation. I'm wondering why there are no performance standards or metrics to assess how the phyto remediation is performing. I work with trees. I love trees, but I don't think that just planting trees and hoping they'll work is adequate. I'm wondering, Larry Lemke did point out that this is a pilot project, but I don't see a clear mechanism for how that study is actually going to be done. Is there going to be evidence to show how much of the dioxane the trees take up, whether they destroy it, whether some remains in the fallen leaves or in the wood? Who will do that monitoring? Who will pay? Will there be testing of the shallow water upstream and downstream of those trees to assess how much dioxane they're removing? I think the lack of a more rigorous assessment of this phytoremediation is a concern, especially because the core contamination zone and the source zone is where a lot of treatment effort and expense really should be focused. So I just want to say this consent judgment, I've still been trying to dig in and process.
We've lost you again.
I'm not persuaded that this is the best path forward, but I hope that you'll continue to consider seriously all the concerns that have been raised. Thank you, all of you, for holding this session.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm going to try the number ending in 4464 one more time. If you push *6 to activate your own mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Thank you so much for speaking up for scientific training.
Can you identify yourself so we know who you are?
My name is Linda Brower. I'm a longtime resident of Ann Arbor at 421 3rd Street. And I wanted to thank you for speaking up for transparency and equal time for experts on the other side of the issue. Thank you so much for that. This consent judgment and settlement agreements are extremely disappointing. After years of negotiations and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, the interveners may be tempted to acquiesce to a totally unsatisfactory agreement out of utter exhaustion. You should not acquiesce. You have heard and will continue to hear from many about the technical flaws in this new proposal and why the steps Gelman is willing to take will be ineffective. So I won't reiterate them here. In terms of the legal position, as an affected resident, I am unwilling to give up all my future rights in this matter by accepting this new CJ and the settlement agreements. And the county and the other interveners should also be unwilling to do this on our behalf. I want to talk about 3 issues that I believe stand in your way of rejecting this CJ: stigma, time, and risk. I think there's been a certain amount of fear-mongering on those points with regard to pursuing application for US EPA Superfund status. First, stigma. In my view, the stigma of continuing to let the plume expand as far as it has over decades
with very little political will to contain and clean it up properly, and ultimately failing by signing off in a CJ that gives Gelman all the power and binds you and your successors to forbidding all future remedies is a far more shameful stigma, far worse than being listed as a Superfund site that is on the road to a near complete cleanup. Second, time. Many moan about how long a Superfund cleanup will take. Yes, it will take time. That's why we have to start the process now. We just wasted over 3 years in secret negotiations that resulted in a plan that gives Gelman all the power to decide when its role is complete and allows Gelman to utilize its cheapest technology and allows Eagle to resolve any disputes with the sole stipulation that Eagle will consider local government's concerns in, quote, good faith, unquote, which we know is a vague and meaningless assurance. Let's not waste any more time. Third, risk. I believe the risk of Superfund status has been overstated. If there is a proven responsible polluter with the funds and technology to do the fullest cleanup possible, all that is lacking is an entity with enforcement power. U.S. EPA has the power. There is no need to rely on federal funds. I have even heard the argument from some that the EPA might get dismantled if Trump gets reelected. We'll know that in November and can plan our next steps accordingly. To sign off on the CG in court on October 19th.
Linda, your time is up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. That is all the comments that have asked to be recognized. So Jason, I'm turning this back to you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you again for being with us to moderate that portion of the meeting. Your involvement in this entire process has been incredibly valuable and really has helped bring us together working in a collaborative way on this as our respective units of government. We've had many, many long meetings together at this point. I do want to move to, so I'll move through, actually, I guess, Congresswoman, I need you to declare the public hearing now closed. Would you be willing to do that?
The public hearing is now closed.
Perfect, thank you. So that's quite a bit. We do have technically a public participation piece to our meeting as well. I do want to encourage folks, this is required by Open Meetings Act. I do want to encourage folks that if you have sort of refrain from reiterating comments from the prior part of the meeting or having comments related to Gelman necessarily. Usually public participation separate from the public hearing is focused on other issues. But if folks would like to make comments during our regular meeting here, you have 3 minutes as a time limit, and same rules apply in terms of raising your hand, etc. So Congresswoman Dingell, I would understand if you are not able to stick with us through the rest of this, if we have a lot of public comment here. This is
I wouldn't think of leaving you all. I'm in this with everybody.
So anyway, to just simply put it here, technically folks have a chance for more public participation. We would really highly encourage you to not reiterate the same things that you've already told us, just for the sake of everybody's time. But you have 3 minutes, and we will be real strict with the 3-minute rule, given that we've had a lot of opportunity to talk about Gelman at this point during the public hearing portion of our meeting. Crystal, could you, oh yes, Crystal is letting me know who would like to speak here. Again, at 3 minutes, we will just cut you off cold. There's no warning or anything at this point, just given that we've been here for quite a while here tonight. First up is Roger Rail. Roger? Or is that a holdover from the?
Sorry, I didn't unmute. Senior moment there. Again, Roger Rail, chair of CARD and co-founder of CARD, co-founder of Cy Residents for Safe Water and chair of Cy Residents for Safe Water. Thanks for having this meeting. Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell, for your strong statements. I want everybody to understand that what you decide about this is going to decide for all future boards who follow you, many decades, maybe even centuries into the future. So you have a lot of weight on your shoulders, and you don't have a lot of supporting documentation for accepting this proposal. In fact, quite the opposite. You have reasons to reject it. During the presentations by Fred and Larry, I made 60 notes of concerns from those two presentations. And of course, I'm not going to be able to cover those in 3 minutes, and you don't want to hear any more about it. But this is the level of detail we must have for an issue like this. This is a super fun size site, and it's going to be a super fun size site no matter what happens with your decision. The question is, who do you want to be in charge of cleaning up this super fun size site? And who do you want to pay for it? So I'll leave it there because you've heard from me enough. Again, if you haven't looked at those videos from SIO, do that. And we're going to have a lot more emails to you all in the next few days, coming weeks. So thanks again.
Great, thank you. Next up, I apologize if this is still just a holdover. Sally Booth Swadron, do you actually have a comment this time?
Did you call 2744?
No, we called Sally. Well, is your name Sally?
No.
Oh, Sally, it's a
That's an
mistake.
error.
Sorry, just figured I'd err on the side of calling on you rather than not calling on you. The next up is the number ending in 4464. So now I'm calling on the number ending in 4464.
Yes, thank you so much. This is Linda Brower again. I am not going to repeat, but I do want to continue from where I left off. I was talking about risk, and I was mentioning how some people are afraid if Trump gets reelected, the EPA will be trashed. Well, that may happen. Hopefully it won't. But to sign off on the CJ in court on October 18th because Trump might get reelected is the worst submission to fear. You may be tempted to acquiesce because of the years and legal fees invested into this CJ to date. You made a good faith attempt to intervene. Unfortunately, your good faith was not reciprocated by Gelman Sciences. It's time to cut your losses and recognize you are not negotiating with a good faith partner. The best that can be said about Gelman is that they have really good attorneys. Most wealthy corporations do. Finally, I ask you to look at the CJ and settlement agreements in an unbiased manner and listen to experts in our community who are unbiased. The attorneys for the interveners are certainly biased. The CJ restricts us in so many ways and allows us to go back to court in limited areas of dispute, and we'll be paying our attorneys to go on another 3-year merry-go-round. The attorneys may like that, but as a taxpayer footing the bill, I do not. The attorneys for the interveners say this is the best they can do in negotiations. Okay, they got paid, and the best they could do is not good enough. Let's cut our losses and pursue other routes. You should reject this in court on October 18th. After November 4th, we can plan our next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Vince Caruso.
Hello again. I just want to make a few points here about what's going on with our neighborhood. We have issues with vapor intrusion on the west side of Ann Arbor. Vapor intrusion into homes and businesses has been shown at 100 parts per billion to be a potential dangerous exposure to occupants. Ann Arbor's west side has lots of wet basements and damp basements that are used for offices, for play spaces, for workrooms. We don't have enough monitoring wells to determine the kind of levels we're getting with this current CJ. We could have 100 parts per billion and we wouldn't even know it. Danaher should be using the best available technologies for this cleanup. Gelman has in the past pumped and treat to non-detect below 1 part per billion And it was slightly more expensive than what they're using now, and they should not have been allowed to change that. On EPA, Senator Stabenow personally told me in 2016, after Donald Trump took office, EPA will still be doing polluter pay cleanups. She oversees EPA in the Senate of the United States. She said, it's the orphan sites that are a real problem. This is not an orphan site. The polluter will be paying for this cleanup. The 2016 Lautenberg Act had 10 chemicals of all the thousands of chemicals they could choose to include in the Toxin Substance Control Act, TSCA. 1,4-dioxane was chosen out of all those thousands to be evaluated to be included in that listing. That's a significant indication of the toxicity of this compound. I also want to say that I agree with the previous lawyer who called in and asked Mayor Taylor to recuse himself. I would ask the same thing for the same reason. Thank you.
Thank you. That is all of the public comment we have. So we will move to elected official response to public participation. If any of the elected officials would like to make a comment or ask a question or anything like that, you may use the hand raise function and I will recognize you for that. Chris will hopefully help me as there are a lot of folks to scroll through here. Commissioner Schenk.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank everybody who came and learned more about the settlement and gave us your comments, gave us your opinion. It's a lot. The settlement documents are a lot, and the work that the members of CARD have done for years is a lot. And I appreciate your input and taking this very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Schenk. Are there any other items at this time? I know the goal of our meeting really was to listen, and so I don't anticipate a lot of back and forth or discussion here. Our goal is to listen to the public tonight to make sure questions are answered. And I know a lot of the debate for each of us will happen within our respective bodies, given that each of us have different components of the consent judgment that we need to consider. So I just don't want the public in any way to think that we're not discussing what they've shared with us tonight. I think the goal was for us to listen and to answer questions, and then for us to go back to our respective bodies and have much of that discussion there. But I want to make sure there's the opportunity here if folks have any overall concerns here. Councilwoman Griswold.
I just want to thank all of the community members who have lent their expertise to this decision that we are faced with, and especially thank CARD, Dan Bicknell, and Roger Rail. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, with that then, I will just simply sort of wrap this up by saying thank you very much to all of our staff, particularly Crystal Campbell, who's been fielding questions, helping with a lot of tech issues, and helping set all of this meeting up along with the rest of our county staff. They've done a whole lot of work to pull this together. Thank you to our attorneys, Dr. Lemke, and to CARD, everybody who's participated here tonight. Our goal really was to listen and then to take that feedback we've heard tonight back to our respective bodies as we think about what we will each decide respectively here. Thank you again to Congresswoman Dingell. This has been a long process here, and I think our goal has been to get this conversation out in the public, share everything that we can with everyone in the public as well. And this isn't the last conversation. There'll be many more within their respective bodies. Congresswoman Dingell, do you have any closing words here?
I guess I do. I want to say to everybody, to all of the electeds and to all of the people that have participated, this has been a really important discussion. I think that, for too long, people weren't talking to each other, or people were trying to pit people against each other. This is really tough stuff. And all of us, I think there may be disagreements, or there are disagreements about what the best approach is, but I know that everybody cares deeply about ensuring that everybody has access to clean water and that we're keeping the environment clean. I think it's really important to everybody that this process continue to be transparent, I would urge those who are participating that the more information you can make transparent, the better it is, because people who don't know what's not being made public don't understand why it's not being made public, and it contributes to people's lack of confidence. I'm gonna be that blunt, but we got to keep talking to each other. We got to keep working with each other, because dissent and pitting people against each other, I'm probably being too blunt here, is what we've seen happen at a national level for 4 years. Let's not let it happen in Washtenaw County. Let's get this cleaned up. Let's make sure that the communities are safe, and let's continue this process of trying to work together, whatever the answer to that is. And part of that is a really transparent discussion going forward these next few weeks. So thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Nobody likes spending 3 hours on a Zoom town hall. I hate boxes. I hope I can see you all soon. But notice everybody who's here, all the electeds did stay, because they do care.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And yes, that is really important to reiterate that all of us here care very deeply about ensuring safe drinking water for our community, and that we find the best possible outcome given the Gelman situation for our residents. I see Councilwoman Bannister's hand is up here as well. Did you have a closing comment?
I just wanted to announce that later this afternoon, the city did confirm that we will be meeting again on Wednesday, September 30th at 6 o'clock to hear more public comments and listen to more public comments.
Got it. Thank you very much for that information. That's helpful. Great. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn tonight.
So moved.
Support.
Okay. Moved and supported. Would one of the clerks or attorneys tell me if I need to do a roll call to end the meeting?
It's not necessary for us.
Okay, great.
The city can leave. For us either.
Okay, great. There's been a motion to adjourn, and it's been supported. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Great. We are adjourned. Thank you all very, very much for meeting tonight.
Night, everybody.